Hey guys, tonight we drop you straight into a small wooden room where the air tastes like smoke, damp wool, and last night's candle. You are wrapped in a quilt that somehow feels both heavy and useless, and you cannot decide if you are freezing or burning. So naturally, you do both at once. Outside, America in the 1700s creaks along at the pace of hooves and gossip, and inside, your body is staging its own little revolution. You probably won't survive this if you approach it with modern confidence, the kind where you think a thermometer and a pharmacy are basic human rights. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Because I love imagining this story, drifting across different bedrooms and different nights. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink into the low light and realize the room is quieter than it should be. Not peaceful quiet. Watchful quiet. The kind where everyone is listening to your breathing like it is a radio signal that might cut out. You hear a floorboard complain in the next room, then a whispered voice, then the scrape of a chair. Someone is awake with you, which is sweet, and also a little creepy when you consider that your job right now is to keep existing. Your skin feels slick. Your shirt clings in places it should not. Your mouth is so dry you could write a letter on your tongue. When you swallow, your throat burns, and you get that small, panicky thought. Is this just a bad cold? Or is this one of those illnesses people say the name of like it is a curse? In your world, you would Google symptoms, read 7 terrifying possibilities, and then drink electrolyte water while pretending you are fine. Here, there is no search bar. Just memory, superstition, and the facial expressions of whoever checks on you. A hand presses to your forehead. It is cool, and it lingers like the person is trying to decide whether your heat is a problem or a prophecy. You hear someone say the word fever the same way people say fire. The next part happens fast, even if it feels slow. A neighbor is sent. Not because neighbors are bored, though yes, they are definitely a little bored. A neighbor is sent because illness in the 1700s is a community event. Your body might be the main stage, but everyone in the settlement is in the audience, and half of them are backstage handing out props. The neighbor returns with news. Someone is going to fetch a doctor. Now, take a moment and appreciate what that means here. A doctor is not an emergency room. A doctor is not a glowing building with rolling chairs and little plastic bracelets. A doctor is a person who might be good, might be terrible, might be drunk, might be brilliant, might be all of those in one week. And the first question is not, what does your insurance cover? Because cute concept, but where is he right now? And how long will it take him to get here? If you live near a town, maybe he's only a short ride away. If you are farther out, you could be waiting hours, or you could be waiting until morning, depending on weather, roads, rivers, and whether the doctor's horse has opinions about mud. There is a reason people in this era treat distance like a medical diagnosis. While you wait, your home becomes the clinic by default. The bed you are on is suddenly the center of planning. The fire is tended carefully, because warmth is medicine, and so is smoke. And also, smoke is just what you get when you live in a world where everything is wood and everyone is always burning something. Someone brings a bowl. Another person brings cloth. Another person brings water and holds it like it is gold. In a way, it is. You hear fragments of conversation that drift in and out like dreams. Someone mentions last winter, when old Mr. Carter had a fever and then he took a turn. Someone else says maybe it is the egg. a word people use for fevers that come and go, especially in marshy places. Someone suggests it might be something you ate. Someone suggests it might be punishment. Someone suggests, very helpfully, that you should have been hardier, which is the 1700s version of telling a sick person to drink more water. The reality is that most medical care in 1700s America starts at home. Family members, servants, apprentices, neighbors, and especially women in the household are the first line of treatment because they have the most constant access to you. They know what you ate, what you did, what you complained about last week, and which herbs are stored where. This is a mainstream fact of the era. The sick room is usually domestic, and much of the day-to-day care is informal and practical. Long before any physician arrives, and you are not only being cared for, you are being watched for what kind of sick you are. There is a difference between a fever that is inconvenient and a fever that is socially dangerous. Some diseases carry fear the way smoke carries sparks. If this turns out to be smallpox, people will talk about it in lowered voices, and then they will talk about it loudly, and then they will stop visiting your house, and then they will stand at a distance and ask how you're doing while looking at your skin instead of your eyes. You try to sit up, and your head swims. The ceiling boards tilt. You lie back down, defeated. The room pulses slightly, as if the fever has its own heartbeat. Someone offers you a spoonful of something bitter. It tastes like a plant that regrets being alive. You swallow anyway, because refusing remedies in this era is like refusing politeness. Also, you do not have the energy to argue, and you are not about to get into a philosophical debate with a spoon. There is a strange comfort in the routines. Someone changes the cloth on your forehead. Someone checks the chamber pot. Someone whispers that you should rest. Your family is doing something that looks like love and logistics at the same time. They have to keep the household running while you lie here doing your best impression of a damp loaf of bread. And then you hear it. Hooves outside. A door opens. Cold air rushes in like it has been waiting for an invitation. A voice, older and confident, says your name. The doctor is here. When he enters, you see his bag first. It is not a sleek kit of sealed instruments. It is a leather satchel that looks like it has lived through arguments. He smells faintly of spirits, herbs, and horse. He greets the household, not just you, because your illness is everybody's business. He asks questions that sound simple but carry weight. When did the fever begin? Any vomiting? Any rash? Any pains? Has anyone else been ill? Where have you traveled? What have you eaten? You want to answer, but your thoughts are syrupy. Someone else answers for you. The doctor nods, and you realize he's not only gathering symptoms, he is gathering a story. In this period, many practitioners interpret illness through humoral theory. The idea that health depends on balancing bodily fluids and qualities like hot, cold, wet, and dry. Even if not everyone uses the same words, the approach often feels like adjusting a complicated stew. Too much heat? Cool it down. Too much badness? Remove it. It is tidy logic, and the human body rarely respects tidy logic. He presses fingers to your wrist and counts quietly. He looks at your eyes. He asks to see your tongue. He listens to your chest, not with a stethoscope, because that comes later, but with the trained attention of someone who has heard many breaths turn strange. Then he stands back like a man evaluating a fence. You feel oddly exposed, like your body is a public document. He announces a plan, maybe a purge, to clear what he suspects is trapped inside. Maybe bleeding, to reduce what he suspects is excess. maybe blistering, to draw illness out through the skin. You hear these words, and even through fever haze, you understand one thing: the treatment is going to be intense. The 1700s do not do gentle half measures. They do not do monitor and hydrate. They do let us rearrange the inside of you until your body changes its mind. Here is where historians still argue whether some of these common interventions helped more than they harmed in typical cases. Because while some patients likely benefited from rest, fluids, and supportive care, aggressive bleeding and purging could weaken people who were already on the edge. The truth is messy, and the sickbed is not a laboratory. The doctor reaches into his bag and you hear glass clink. You spot a small folded tool that looks like it belongs in a carpenter's pocket, which is not comforting. You think, absurdly, that if modern medicine is a smartphone, this is like being treated with a pocket watch and a confident smile. Joke 1, delivered softly into your own thoughts, because you're too weak to be snarky out loud. He instructs the household: keep the room aired but not cold. Offer thin broth. Keep you calm. It is almost funny. The idea of keeping you calm when your body feels like it is doing cartwheels. Joke 2 arrives. Yes, sure, you will just be calm while someone discusses removing your blood like it is a kitchen chore. Before anything is done, you catch a glimpse of the social dynamics that decide your care. If you are wealthy, the doctor stays longer, returns more often, brings more supplies, and writes more notes. If you are poor, you might get a quick visit, a stern lecture, and a recipe for something you can maybe afford. Payment might be cash, but it could also be barter, or labor, or a promise. Medicine is not just science here. It is relationship. And there is one more quirky tidbit that floats through the sick room like a strange little moth. In some households, people keep receipt books, handwritten collections of remedies and household instructions passed along through families, and these can include everything from cough syrups to advice for fevers to oddly confident instructions for problems no one wants to name. Your care is partly shaped by this private archive of trial, error, and inherited hope. The doctor finally turns back to you. His face is serious, but not unkind. You realize he is also tired. He has other patients. Illness does not schedule politely. He tells you, in the plain language of someone used to bargaining with fate, that the next day or two will matter. You will either sweat this out, or you will worsen. Or you will do that terrible thing people describe as slipping away. Like life is a blanket falling off the bed. You breathe in. Smoke, wool, wax, damp wood. Your eyelids grow heavy. The household shifts into a new rhythm. Watch, wait, tend, pray, argue quietly. Pretend not to be scared. Outside, the night thickens. Inside, the doctor's presence leaves a trail of authority and dread. And as you sink back into the pillow, you understand the first real lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. It is never just your body. It is your home, your neighbors, your money, your reputation, your distance from town, and the speed of a horse on a dark road. The night stretches on, elastic and strange, and your house settles into a new identity without asking your permission. It is no longer just a place where people sleep, eat, and argue about small things. It is a hospital now, even if no one uses that word. Your bed is the ward. The hearth is the pharmacy. The table becomes a supply station layered with bowls, cloths, candles, and little piles of things that might help or might just make everyone feel less helpless. You wake and sleep in uneven waves. Each time you surface, someone is there. Not always the same person. Because sickness in the 1700s runs on shifts. Your wife or mother sits close, her posture learned through long practice, half listening for changes in your breath, half listening for the rest of the house. A child peers in from the doorway, then is shooed away because children are both comforting and suspiciously fragile. A neighbor arrives with soup and unsolicited opinions. Someone else leaves to tend animals, because the cows do not care that you are having a medical crisis. This is one of the quiet realities of the era. When you get sick, the entire household workload reshuffles itself around your body. Meals still need cooking. Fires still need feeding. Water still needs hauling. If you are the one who usually does those things, the gap you leave is immediate and obvious. People feel it in their backs and their schedules, and that pressure hums underneath every whispered conversation about your condition. You hear someone say, "He's sleeping now," like it is a report to a superior officer. Sleep is a sign, and everyone interprets signs. Too much sleep means weakness. Too little means agitation. Sweat is good, unless it is too much. Shivering is bad, unless it breaks the fever. Your body becomes a text that everyone reads differently, and no one agrees on the meaning. The doctor's instructions echo in the room. Keep you warm, but not stifled. Offer liquids, but not too much. Keep the air moving, but do not chill you. This balancing act feels a lot like parenting, except the child is an adult with a beard and the stakes are, inconveniently, life and death. Joke 1 drifts through your mind. Congratulations. You have been demoted to the household's most complicated project. Someone changes the cloth on your forehead again. It smells faintly of vinegar or spirits. The cool shock makes you gasp, and for a moment, the room sharpens into focus. You see worry etched into familiar faces. You also see calculation. How long can they keep this up? Who will cover which tasks tomorrow? Who might need to be asked for help? And what will that cost socially? Because help is not free, even when it is kind. When neighbors come to sit with you, they are generous, but they are also keeping track, the way communities always do. You will owe them, or your family will. Illness creates invisible debts alongside very visible bills. A mainstream fact of life in this period is that most nursing care is done by women, often without pay, and often without recognition beyond a vague sense of duty. They know how to clean, how to feed, how to manage a sick room so it does not descend into chaos. They know when to worry and when to let someone rest. Their knowledge is practical, accumulated, and rarely written down in official medical texts. It is learned through watching other people survive. Someone opens a window a crack. Cold night air slips in, sharp and alive. You shiver, and immediately a blanket is pulled tighter around you. This dance repeats all night. Air, then warmth. Water, then rest. Check the pulse. Listen to the breathing. Wipe the sweat. Whisper encouragement. Even though you are not sure how much you can hear. And you do hear things, drifting in and out like half-remembered dreams. You hear prayers murmured under breath. Not formal ones, but improvised bargains with God that sound suspiciously like negotiations. You hear someone say your name softly, like they are anchoring you to the room. You hear the house creak and pop as the fire burns down and is built back up again. At one point, you wake convinced the walls are moving closer. Your heart races. Your breath comes shallow. Panic blooms, hot and fast. Someone notices. They sit you up slightly, talk to you, tell you where you are. There is no word for panic attack here, but people know fear when they see it. They call it agitation, or nerves, or simply being beside oneself. They soothe you the same way they soothe everything else. Presence, voice, touch. Historians still argue whether the emotional environment of the sick room significantly affected recovery outcomes. But it is clear that people in the 1700s believe morale matters. A calm patient is a hopeful patient. A hopeful patient is one who might pull through. Fear is treated almost like another symptom, one that can spread if not managed. Sometime before dawn, someone offers you a sip of something stronger than water, a little ale, watered down. Because alcohol is considered strengthening in small amounts, it tastes thin and comforting. You swallow and immediately feel ridiculous gratitude. Joke 2 appears. Modern medicine has IV fluids, but you get medieval happy hour. The house smells different by morning. Stale smoke, sweat, broth, damp cloth. The light changes too, creeping in through the window and making everything look more tired and more honest. Morning is both a relief and a reckoning. You made it through the night, which is good. You're still sick, which is bad. Everyone recalibrates their expectations accordingly. Breakfast happens around you. You're offered thin porridge or broth, and praised extravagantly if you manage more than a few spoonfuls. Eating is treated like a moral victory. If you refuse, people worry. If you vomit, they worry more. Your appetite becomes a public metric. Someone mentions that the doctor might return later today. Someone else says he's busy, that there are other fevers in the area. The phrase, "something going around," floats through the room, even though no one knows exactly what that something is. They know patterns, though. This time of year is bad for sickness. It always is. Here is a quirky tidbit that slides into the scene. Some households hang specific objects near the sickbed. Bits of iron, written verses, or small charms, believed to ward off illness or bad spirits. Even families who pride themselves on being sensible sometimes do this quietly, just in case. You notice something unfamiliar near your bed and wonder how long it has been there. Your body feels heavy, like it has been filled with sand. Every movement costs you. You need help to shift positions, and the loss of independence stings more than you expect. This is another hidden part of getting sick in this era. Dignity erodes quickly. You are wiped, fed, watched, discussed. Your body is no longer private, but there is also an intimacy here that modern hospital curtains cannot replicate. You are surrounded by people who know you, who have shared meals and seasons and losses with you. When they worry, it is personal. When they hope, it is fierce. Joke 3 floats up gently, on the bright side. At least your caretakers do not bill you by the minute. As the day wears on, the house settles into this new rhythm. Someone takes over your usual tasks. Someone else keeps watch. Life does not stop for your fever, but it bends around it, creaking and complaining, yet holding. You drift again, suspended between sleep and waking, wrapped in wool and worry, and in that half space, you begin to understand the second lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Survival is not just about remedies and doctors. It is about whether your household can absorb the shock of your illness without breaking, and whether the people around you have the time, strength, and will to keep showing up at your bedside. You drift in and out of sleep until the world snaps back into focus with the soft clack of the doctor's bag opening again. The sound is oddly specific, like a stage cue. Someone has fetched him back, or he has decided you are interesting enough to revisit, which is a compliment you do not want. He stands near the foot of your bed with the calm expression of a man about to rearrange your insides by philosophy. He asks how the night went. Your family answers before you can. You try to speak, but your voice comes out thin and scratchy, like a broom bristle. The doctor nods anyway, as if your croak confirms a theory. He takes your wrist again, counting. He watches your breathing. He studies the color of your face. He asks if you have moved your bowels, because nothing says dignity like a room full of people intensely interested in your poop schedule. He does not call it germs. Nobody in this room has that framework yet. Instead, he talks in the language that still guides much of formal medicine in the 1700s, humors and balance. The idea is old, inherited from classical authorities and filtered through generations of practice. The body, in this view, is a system of fluids and qualities. Too much heat, too much cold, too much moisture, too much dryness, too much blood, too much bile, too much something you cannot even picture. Illness is imbalance, and treatment is correction. A mainstream historical fact you are living right now is that many colonial American physicians and learned practitioners still rely on humoral thinking and evacuation therapies, meaning they try to remove excess or harmful matter through bleeding, vomiting, sweating, or purging. It is medicine as plumbing, and you are the unfortunate house. The doctor asks for a basin and clean cloth. That request lands in the room with a quiet thud. Your family stiffens. You stiffen too, as much as a fevered person can stiffen. You know what is coming, because everyone knows what is coming. Bloodletting is common, almost routine, and it carries a strange authority. It looks like action. It looks like doing something. When people are frightened, doing something can feel like hope you can hold. He explains, gently but firmly, that your fever suggests an excess of heat or a fullness of blood that must be reduced. He might use a lancet, a small sharp blade, or he might apply leeches if he has them, and if you are the sort of patient who can afford the extra drama. You try to imagine leeches and immediately regret having imagination. Joke one flickers through your fog. You have been sick for one day, and now you are apparently a wine barrel that needs tapping. Someone rolls up your sleeve. The doctor's hands are practiced. He ties a strip of cloth above your elbow to make the vein rise. Your skin is hot and your arm feels heavy. You look away. There is no point being brave about it, because bravery does not stop the blade. You feel a quick sting, then warmth that is not fever warmth. The basin catches the steady, dark stream. The room goes even quieter. People watch, because blood is both terrifying and persuasive. Part of you feels relief, like something is finally being released. Another part of you feels faint, because you are literally losing volume. The doctor watches your face as much as he watches the basin. When your eyelids flutter and your breath changes, he stops. He presses cloth to the cut, ties it off, and tells you to rest. You lie there, weak and a little hollow, and you wonder if you feel better because you do or because everyone wants you to. Your family looks at you with the fragile optimism of people who have seen bleeding work before, in the sense that sometimes the patient survives afterward, which is a low bar but a very popular one. The doctor is not finished. He turns to the next line of attack. A purge, perhaps a dose of calomel, a mercurial compound used in many treatments, or another strong laxative, perhaps something to make you vomit, because if illness is inside you, the logical move is to force it out in a direction of your body's choosing. He speaks as if your stomach is a troublesome tenant. You swallow what he gives you, because refusing a doctor in this era is like refusing a priest mid-sermon. Also, you're too tired to argue, and your family is watching, ready to interpret cooperation as a sign you are fighting for your life. The medicine tastes sharp and metallic, and it sits in your belly like a threat. Not long after, the cramps begin. They build slowly, then insistently, like someone knocking on a door that they fully expect you to open. Your mouth waters, your stomach clenches. You grip the blanket and try to breathe through it. Joke 2 arrives, very softly, because humor is sometimes the only thing you can keep. You have officially entered the 1700s wellness retreat, featuring detox, blood removal, and 0 customer reviews. Someone helps you to the chamber pot. The humiliation is immediate and total. You are sweating. Your hands shake. Your family turns away politely. Which is almost worse, because it confirms the moment has become a shared agreement not to look directly at your suffering. When it is over, you collapse back onto the bed, exhausted. The doctor watches, satisfied in the way a man can be satisfied when a plan produces evidence. He might recommend a blister next. Blistering is exactly what it sounds like, creating a controlled injury on the skin, often with substances like cantharides, to draw inflammation or bad humors outward. It is painful and it looks horrifying, but it is popular because it is visible. When a treatment leaves a mark, people feel it must be working. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of aggressive evacuations like bleeding and purging persisted, as long as it did because of genuine observed benefits in certain cases, or because the visible intensity of these interventions matched cultural expectations of what serious medicine should look like. In other words, did it help, or did it simply satisfy the human need to see effort? Your doctor, like many of his contemporaries, is not a cartoon villain. He believes he is helping. He has seen people die untreated, and he has seen people survive after treatment. The problem is that survival is noisy data. People who are going to survive anyway also survive after a purge. People who are doomed sometimes die after the purge, and it is blamed on the illness, not the remedy. Your body is a gamble table, and everyone is squinting at the dice. While the doctor talks, you notice something else about his bag. It is not just tools. It is papers, notes, little folded recipes. Some doctors keep casebooks, recording symptoms, treatments, and outcomes, partly to learn, partly to prove their skill. In a world where reputation travels faster than facts, a doctor's credibility is everything. He cannot post a diploma on a website. He has to be known, trusted, talked about. Here comes a quirky tidbit that makes you feel strangely modern. Some physicians in the colonies advertise, not always with posters, but with announcements, printed notices, or word-of-mouth claims about special skills, imported medicines, or training in Europe. Medicine has marketing even in the 1700s. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the pitch. Now, with improved bleeding techniques, joke 3 nudges in. You are not sure what is worse, the Lancet or the idea that someone is running a promotional campaign for it. The doctor gives final instructions for the day. Keep you quiet, feed you lightly, watch for a rash, note your stools, note your urine, note your mood. You are now the household's most closely monitored project, with a care plan that reads like a checklist for surviving a storm. When he leaves, the room exhales. Your family begins to tidy up the evidence, wiping the basin, folding cloths, resetting the space as if restoring order might restore health. You lie back, spent. The fever still burns, but it has shifted. Your body feels both emptied and inflamed, like a fireplace after someone has stirred the coals too hard. You close your eyes and listen to the house around you, to the footsteps and murmurs and the scrape of a ladle in a pot. You feel the pulse in your cut arm, a small reminder that medicine here is not gentle. It is corrective. It is physical. It is convinced that the body can be forced back into line. And as your stomach settles into a wary truce and your head swims in the aftertaste of metal and herbs, you learn the third lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Treatment is not something that happens around you. It happens to you. It leaves you weaker, marked, and hopeful in a desperate way. Because once the doctor has acted, everyone wants to believe the fever must now obey. After the doctor's visit, the house moves with that careful, quiet people use when they are trying not to wake someone who might be recovering, or might be dying, and nobody wants to be the one who finds out which. You lie there, feeling wrung out, like the fever and the purge and the bleeding have turned you into a damp rag. Someone keeps squeezing to see what comes out next. But then the real work resumes. Because in 1700s America, the doctor is a guest star. The main cast is your household, and the household's medicine cabinet is not a glossy aisle of labeled bottles. It is the pantry, the garden, the hedgerow, the woods, the memory of what worked for an aunt, and what someone swore by back in the old country, and what an enslaved healer once suggested in a low voice when the overseer was not listening. Someone brings you a cup of tea. It is warm, and it smells like crushed leaves and hope. The steam curls up and fogs your face. You sip and immediately taste bitterness, then sweetness, then a strange medicinal sharpness that lingers on the back of your tongue. You do not know what is in it, exactly. You only know that it is what people do when someone is sick. They make something. A mainstream historical fact is that much of everyday healthcare in colonial America is handled through household remedies and local materia medica, meaning people rely on plants, kitchen ingredients, and simple preparations long before or alongside professional medical visits. Even when a physician prescribes something, the ingredients and the brewing often happen right here, under your roof, by someone who has done it before. Your caretaker, probably a woman in the household, talks through the options as if she's reading a menu you did not ask for. Willow bark for pain, if they have it, because people know it can ease aches even if they do not know why. Mint or pennyroyal for stomach troubles, chamomile to calm you, sage for the throat, honey to make everything slightly less awful, onion poultices for the chest, vinegar for wiping down cloths, garlic because garlic is, apparently, a moral stance. They might add molasses or rum, partly for taste, partly because alcohol is often viewed as warming and fortifying. It is also a convenient way to make someone swallow a medicine they would otherwise spit across the room. Your gag reflex is not consulted. You hear the clink of a mortar and pestle in the next room. Someone is grinding dried herbs into powder. The rhythmic scrape is oddly soothing, like a lullaby for the desperate. The house smells greener now, layered with plant oils and warm syrup, like someone has turned your sickroom into a half-functioning apothecary. Joke one floats in, modern people light eucalyptus candles for vibes. Your family is basically forcing the entire herb aisle into your bloodstream. A cloth is placed on your chest. It is warm and slightly damp. A poultice. The word itself sounds gentle, like a pillow. The reality is a mash of plant matter, sometimes mixed with bread, milk, or fat, pressed against your skin to draw out inflammation. Soothe pain, or, in the logic of the time, pull sickness outward. It smells like the earth after rain. You want to dislike it, but the warmth feels good. Someone rubs your feet with something pungent, maybe camphor or an herbal oil. They tell you it will bring the heat down, or drive it out, or settle the spirits. Those phrases are flexible, and that is part of the appeal. When you cannot see inside a body, you describe it like weather and haunting. At some point, someone offers you something called bitters, a tincture steeped in alcohol and herbs, meant to stimulate appetite and strengthen digestion. It tastes like bark and regret. You swallow anyway, because your family is watching. And you have learned that in this era, being sick includes performing cooperation. You start to notice that remedies come with stories. Every spoonful carries an anecdote. This helped your uncle after the river fever. This is what my mother used in Massachusetts. The midwife swears by this. Old Mrs. Pritchard says it saved her boy. The medicine is not just chemical, it is narrative, and narrative is a kind of support when nothing is certain. Historians still argue whether the reliance on household remedies created a stronger sense of agency and resilience in communities, or whether it sometimes delayed seeking outside help when diseases were truly dangerous. It is probably both, depending on the illness and the people involved. From your bed, it feels like everyone is throwing ropes into a dark well, hoping one of them catches. Then comes the more mysterious side of the pantry pharmacy, the remedies that feel half practical and half superstitious. Someone might tuck a small sachet under your pillow, dried herbs and perhaps a bit of something symbolic, like a little root shaped vaguely like a person. Someone might pin a written verse near the bed. Someone might whisper a charm so quietly it can pretend to be a prayer if anyone asks. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits the moment like a shadow. Remedies in this era often blend medical and magical thinking without anyone feeling a need to separate them. People can be deeply religious and still use amulets. They can trust a doctor and still place faith in a particular plant gathered at a particular moon. The boundary between science, tradition, and spiritual protection is more like a smudge than a line. Your fever rises again in the afternoon. The room wavers. Your heart thuds too loudly. Sweat breaks out across your neck and back. And someone immediately declares, "This is good," that you are breaking the fever. They strip off damp cloth and replace it, trying to keep you from chilling. They feed the fire, then open the window slightly, then close it again. The sick room becomes a constant argument between air and warmth. You hear a child cough somewhere in the house, and the adults fall silent for a beat. One cough is nothing. 2 coughs is a worry. In this period, contagion is understood in patches. People know sickness can spread. They argue about how, is it bad air? Is it contact? Is it a miasma rising from swamps? Is it a moral failing? Is it God's will? The uncertainty makes everyone hyper-alert. Someone boils linens. Someone scrubs the floor near your bed. Someone burns herbs in the hearth because it cleans the air. The smell is sharp, almost sweet, like rosemary and smoke. Joke 2 slips in. You are not sure if you are being treated or slow roasted with seasoning. You ask for water, and they bring it, but carefully. Too much water might be thought to weaken digestion, or it might be encouraged, depending on the caregiver. These decisions are not standardized. They are personal and local. Your caretakers are doing their best with the tools they have, which are mostly experience and instinct. Later, when your stomach settles, someone offers you a little broth with bread soaked in it. The taste is simple: salt, warmth. It feels like the closest thing to kindness you can swallow. Your body accepts it grudgingly. When evening comes, your family prepares for another night of watchfulness. They rotate again, because fatigue makes mistakes, and mistakes can kill. Someone sits by the fire, mending something by hand while keeping an eye on you, multitasking like a professional. Someone else dozes in a chair, waking every time you shift. You hear the small sounds of domestic life continuing in the margins: a pot being rinsed, a door latch clicking, a whispered argument about whether to send for the doctor again. Joke 3 appears. Soft and sleepy. If you survive, you're definitely leaving a 5-star review for community-based care, even if the amenities include a chamber pot and the constant smell of boiled onions. And through it all, you begin to sense the heart of this section's truth. Your medical world is not a system. It is a patchwork. It is what grows nearby. It is what someone remembers. It is what can be afforded. It is what is believed. It is made of hands, not machines. You lie there with a poultice cooling on your chest, bitter tea drying on your lips, and the house humming around you like a living organism. The doctor may return, but tonight your care belongs to the kitchen, the garden, the whispered recipes, and the steady, stubborn people who keep bringing you warmth in small, imperfect, human doses. By the next morning, your fever has that sly, lingering quality, like it is not done with you yet. It is just taking a short walk around the room to see what else it can touch. You wake to the sound of whispering again, and it is different this time, less practical, more hushed. The kind of whispering that tries not to become a rumor, and fails anyway. Someone has noticed something on your skin. At first you think it is just sweat rash, a little irritation from heat and blankets and hours of being rubbed down with vinegar cloths like you are a countertop. But then you feel it, a tightness, a tenderness, a raised bump near your hairline, then another at the edge of your jaw. Your fingers graze your cheek and you flinch. It hurts in a sharp, prickly way that feels too specific to ignore. The room fills with that slow dread that has no name but has plenty of facial expressions. People come close, then stop themselves. Someone leans in to look, then leans back as if your skin has teeth. Your caretaker does not say the word right away, because saying it makes it real. Smallpox. In 1700s America, that name is not just a diagnosis. It is a social earthquake. It is the illness people fear the way sailors fear reefs. It can disfigure, blind, kill, and it can move through families and towns with cruel efficiency. A mainstream historical fact is that smallpox outbreaks are frequent and devastating in colonial North America, and survivors often carry lifelong pockmarks, while communities develop a deep collective dread of the disease. You can feel the fear turning your household into a different kind of place. The sick room is no longer just inconvenient. It is dangerous. Your bed is now the possible source of a chain reaction. Someone sends a child away to stay with relatives. Someone else moves the youngest farther from your door. The window is opened wider. The fire is fed again. Cloths are soaked, wrung out, replaced. The logic shifts from comfort to containment, even if nobody uses that word. They do what they can with what they know, and what they know is partly right and partly guesswork. People understand contagion in a practical sense, even if they argue about its mechanism. They have seen it spread. That is enough. The doctor is sent for, again, quickly, urgently, as if the messenger can outrun the disease by sheer determination. You lie there, heart thudding, and you try to take inventory of your body the way a person does when they realize they might be crossing a line they cannot uncross. Your head aches, your back aches, your skin feels too tight, your throat is raw. The fever that felt like a storm now feels like a fire set deliberately. And you hear the household begin to do math out loud. Who has had smallpox before? Who has not? Who might be immune? Who is at risk? Who should leave? Who cannot leave because there is nowhere to go? Joke 1 creeps in. Faint and bitter, you have officially become the least popular house guest in America. And you did not even bring your own bedding. When the doctor arrives, he looks at you carefully, and for the first time his confidence has a crack in it. Not panic, but gravity. He asks to see the spots. He examines them in the light, tilting your face gently, then stepping back as if he wants to keep a respectful distance from your future. He asks about the timing, the sequence of symptoms, fever first, then the eruption. He nods slowly. He does not say smallpox like a man announcing weather. He says it like a man naming a weapon. Now your household shifts into smallpox protocol, even if it is improvised. Linens are changed and boiled. Visitors are discouraged. The doctor might advise isolating you, keeping your rooms separate, limiting the number of people who enter. Some families in this era go further, hanging cloths soaked with vinegar, burning tar or herbs, fumigating the space because they believe bad air carries sickness. The air becomes thick with sharp scents that promise protection. Historians still argue whether the common emphasis on bad air and fumigation sometimes provided incidental benefits by encouraging ventilation and limiting close contact, or whether it mainly offered psychological comfort while the virus continued its work regardless. Either way, your room now smells like someone is trying to pickle the concept of infection. The doctor talks about what he can do. In this period, treatment for smallpox is mostly supportive. Keep the patient comfortable, manage fever, prevent dehydration, and try to avoid complications. Some practitioners promote cooling regimens, keeping the room cooler, offering light foods, and avoiding overheating. Others insist on warmth and sweating. The arguments can be fierce, because everyone wants certainty, and smallpox refuses to provide it. You get a new set of instructions. Do not scratch. Keep the nails short. Keep the skin clean. That sounds simple until the itching begins, because it always does. The spots multiply, and they move from small raised bumps into the more terrifying stage where they feel like they are filling, tightening, swelling. Your skin becomes a landscape you do not recognize, tender and angry. You want to claw at your own face like an animal, and everyone becomes your guard, gently catching your hands, scolding you, pleading with you as if self-control is a cure. Joke 2 arrives, fragile and sleepy. You have never wanted mittens so badly in your entire life. And of course, this is the one century that does not offer you a convenient little pharmacy aisle labeled anti-itch. Your family begins to take precautions with an edge of fear they try to hide. They might wear extra layers. They might wash hands and cloths more. They might keep distance. In some communities, houses with smallpox cases are marked or avoided, even without official rules. Social quarantine happens naturally, because fear is a very efficient public health policy. And yet, there is another thread running through the dread. Inoculation. You hear the word spoken cautiously, like it is a temptation. Variolation. The practice of intentionally introducing material from a smallpox sore into a healthy person to provoke a milder infection and subsequent immunity, is known in the colonies by the early 1700s and becomes a major controversial tool. Many people credit figures like Cotton Mather and Zabdiel Boylston during the Boston outbreak in 1721 for promoting it, though the practice itself has older roots in Africa, Asia, and the Ottoman Empire. This is a mainstream historical fact, and it changes the landscape of fear because it offers a risky form of control. If your household has heard of inoculation, it becomes a topic that turns kitchens into debating halls. Some say it is life-saving. Some say it is sinful. Some say it spreads disease on purpose. Some say that is exactly the point. People argue about mortality rates, about God's will, about whether it is acceptable to gamble with a child's life to prevent a worse gamble later. You can almost hear the town beyond your walls reacting already, as if your spots are sending signals through the air. Someone will say, "There's smallpox at that house." Someone will decide not to come to market. Someone will cross the street. Someone will pray. Someone will blame. A quirky tidbit slips into your fever dream like a strange little postcard. In some places, people try to protect themselves by carrying items they believe repel infection, like bits of camphor, vinegar sponges, or scented pomanders. It is part chemistry, part charm. You imagine an entire town smelling aggressively of vinegar and pretending it is a force field. Joke 3 drifts in. Congratulations. The hottest trend this season is plague chic, and it pairs beautifully with anxiety. Your own case evolves hour by hour. The fever surges, then dips. Your throat feels as if it is lined with sand. Light hurts your eyes. The bumps on your skin shift into something heavier, more deliberate, each one a little announcement that your body is hosting a war. The household keeps you fed with thin broth and watered drinks, coaxing you to sip, counting swallows like they are coins. The doctor returns when he can, but he cannot sit by you constantly. He has other patients, other fears to manage, and his own health to protect. Though the irony is that doctors in this era sometimes spread illness simply by moving between homes with the same clothes and hands. Nobody in the room wants to say that out loud, but the thought hangs there like smoke. You become aware of how isolation changes the sound of a house. Fewer visitors means fewer voices. The world outside goes quieter. Even your caretakers speak less, because every word feels like it might carry something. The normal rhythm of daily life thins. You are aware of your own breath like it is the only thing happening. And still, there is care. Someone sits with you, even when they are frightened. Someone wipes your face with cool water. Someone whispers reassurance that sounds more like reassurance for themselves. You feel hands on your wrist, checking for life, and you want to tell them you are still here, but your mouth is too dry and your brain is too cloudy. In the middle of the night, when the itching is at its worst and the fever makes the room ripple, you realize smallpox is not just a disease that attacks the body. It attacks the social fabric. It forces decisions. It makes people reveal their courage, their selfishness, their tenderness, their logic, their superstition. You close your eyes and let the darkness swallow the edges of the room. Your skin throbs. Your breath rasps. You are held inside a quarantine made of blankets and fear and boiling water and whispered arguments about inoculation, and you learn the fifth lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Some illnesses do not merely visit. They arrive like an occupying army, and everyone around you must decide, in real time, how much risk they are willing to carry just to keep you alive. The word inoculation keeps circling your sick room like a moth that cannot decide whether the flame is warmth or danger. Even with your head foggy and your skin aching, you catch it in the murmurs beyond the door, in the way people lower their voices and then raise them again when they think you cannot hear. It is not just a medical option. It is a moral argument that walks around on two legs. You are already sick, which means the conversation is partly about everyone else now. Your children, your spouse, the neighbor's boy who delivered broth and stood too close, the cousin who visited yesterday because he heard you were under the weather. And now he is replaying that handshake in his mind like it is a crime scene. If you have smallpox, the household is suddenly facing a brutal decision. Do they try variolation for those who have not yet caught it while they still have time? Or do they trust fate, avoid tempting providence, and hope the outbreak passes them by? Variolation Day is not a neat appointment. It is a tense, improvised ritual. It can happen at a doctor's hands, or sometimes with the guidance of someone in the community who has experience. In some places, ministers weigh in. In others, they condemn it. Families whisper about which doctors are willing to do it and which refuse. Because yes, even physicians disagree. A mainstream historical fact is that variolation becomes increasingly practiced in parts of 18th century colonial America, especially after major outbreaks like Boston in 1721. But it remains controversial due to the real risk of death and the risk of spreading smallpox to others. The method itself is risky by modern standards. Yet to people living with constant smallpox threat, it can look like the only lever they have, while you lie sweating in your bed. You picture what it looks like, because people describe it in vivid, unhelpful detail. A small cut, a scratch, sometimes on the arm, material from a smallpox pustule, taken from a person with a mild case, introduced into that cut, then waiting while fever rises, waiting for a few pox to appear, waiting to see if it stays mild or turns savage, waiting while your neighbors glare at your house, because an inoculated person can be contagious and could, in the worst case, seed a fresh outbreak. The debate in your kitchen heats up. One voice argues that inoculation saves lives. Another insists it is sinful to intentionally infect someone. A third voice says, quietly, that people do it anyway, just not loudly. Someone brings up statistics in the way people do when they have heard a number once, and now it has become scripture. Someone else says numbers cannot be trusted. Someone says God gave humans brains for a reason. Someone says God gave humans rules for a reason. Everyone feels sure and scared at the same time. Historians still argue whether the spread of variolation in the colonies owed more to observed results and practical survival math, or to social networks of trust, including clergy, physicians, and community leaders who endorsed it and helped families accept the risk. From inside your sick room, it feels like both. People want evidence, but they also want permission. Eventually, the decision tips. Maybe because the family has seen smallpox kill before. Maybe because someone knows a household that inoculated and survived. Maybe because your wife looks at your fevered face and decides she will not roll the dice twice if she can help it. So inoculation day comes. It does not feel like a clean medical procedure. It feels like a gathering. A few people come, those directly involved, trying to keep it quiet. The doctor arrives with a small kit, the chosen person. Perhaps your older child or your spouse sits stiffly in a chair. Their eyes are wide with the kind of bravery that is mostly just not running away. The room smells of vinegar and fear. You're too weak to sit up, but you can turn your head. You watch from your bed, your skin throbbing, and the sight makes your stomach tighten. Not because you dislike the person, but because you know exactly what you are watching. A family choosing to step into controlled fire because the uncontrolled fire is worse. Joke 1 slips in, faint and tired. It is like scheduling your own thunderstorm, just to avoid the hurricane. The doctor cleans the arm, as best anyone cleans anything in this era. He makes a small incision or scratches the skin. You see a tiny bead of blood. Then he introduces the material. The person flinches. The doctor ties a small dressing over it. And that is it. The room does not explode. No lightning strikes. Everyone exhales and then immediately starts worrying again, because the real action is delayed. Afterward, the inoculated person is often kept somewhat apart. Sometimes in a separate room or even in a different house if possible, because they can spread the disease. This is where the procedure becomes social dynamite. Your neighbors might approve quietly if they trust it. They might panic if they do not. Some towns try to regulate inoculation, restricting it to certain times or places. Others let it happen in a messy, unofficial way. Either way, people understand that inoculation is not a private choice. It affects everyone. Your household tries to do it carefully. They limit visitors even more. They wash linens. They keep the inoculated person from contact with outsiders. They step lightly around the house, as if noise might wake the virus. It is all a bit absurd and also deadly serious. A quirky tidbit that floats in from the wider world. Variolation knowledge in the Atlantic world draws from multiple streams, including African and indigenous knowledge systems and practices observed in the Ottoman Empire. In Boston, the slave man Onesimus is famously associated with describing inoculation to cotton mather, which becomes part of the story of how the practice is discussed and promoted there. That detail is often repeated because it exposes a truth people do not always like. Survival knowledge travels across boundaries, even when society pretends it does not. You, half delirious, think about how strange it is that wisdom can be both valued and dismissed depending on who says it. Then the fever surges again and your thoughts scatter. Your own smallpox continues its march. The spots swell. The itch becomes a constant hum. Your eyes feel gritty. Your mouth tastes like metal and dryness. Your family continues the cooling regimen, offering thin liquids, keeping the room from overheating, wiping you gently, trying to prevent infection in the sores. They cut your nails short, and they watch your hands like hawks. Joke 2 arrives, even weaker than you are. You have never been supervised this closely, not even when you were a child near a cookie jar. Meanwhile, the inoculated person begins their wait. The first day passes, then another. Everyone watches for a fever, for a few pox, for signs of a mild course. Every cough in the house makes someone jump. Every flushed cheek becomes an emergency. And the community watches too. You can feel it even without seeing it. Fewer footsteps pass your house. Fewer greetings. People deliver food and leave it at a distance. Sometimes they will not even approach the door. In a way, you're experiencing early public health through fear. The idea of quarantine exists, even if it is uneven and full of argument. The doctor returns to check both you and the inoculated person. He looks grim but focused. He may remark on the quality of the pustules, as if they have personalities. He may suggest more cooling drinks, more cleanliness, more patience. He cannot promise anything, and everyone knows it, even if they act like his presence is a guarantee. Historians still argue whether inoculation's overall impact on community-level outbreaks was consistently positive in the colonies, because while it reduced individual risk on average, it could also spark new chains of transmission if done carelessly or amid dense populations. It is the classic dilemma. Saving your family can endanger your neighbors if the timing and precautions fail. In the late hours, you lie half awake listening to the house. You hear the inoculated person shifting in their room, maybe coughing, maybe just turning over. You hear your caretaker whispering a prayer. You hear the fire crackle. The air smells like vinegar again. Somewhere outside, a dog barks and then stops, as if even the animals have agreed to keep it down. Joke 3 drifts in, soft as a blanket. The 1700s version of "I did my own research" is literally someone saying, "My cousin's neighbor tried it and lived." Your fever finally dips for a moment. In that brief calm, you feel the weight of what your household has done. They have taken a terrifying disease and tried to negotiate with it. They have chosen a controlled risk over an uncontrolled one. They have turned medicine into a family strategy and survival into a public controversy. And you learn the 6th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Sometimes the scariest part is not the illness itself, but the way it forces you to decide, with incomplete knowledge, whether to invite danger in on purpose just to keep a worse danger from barging through the door. When the fever loosens its grip for even an hour, your mind starts wandering, and it does not wander to comforting places. It wanders to practical ones, to the small, ordinary things in your life that suddenly look suspicious. The water bucket, the well rope, the muddy path to the privy, the ditch that never quite drains after rain. Because when you live in 1700s America, sickness is not only a visitor that arrives dramatically like smallpox. Sometimes it is just everywhere. In the water you drink, in the air near the waist, in the slow rot under the floorboards. Your household is already on high alert. After smallpox fear, everything feels like it might be poisoned. Your caretaker rinses cups twice. They boil water when they can. though boiling takes fuel, and fuel takes labor. And labor takes strength. Your house is currently short on. They wipe surfaces with vinegar, like vinegar is a holy sacrament. They keep the chamber pot away from the hearth. They do what they can, even if they do not know what they are actually fighting. A mainstream historical fact is that sanitation and clean water systems in 18th century America are limited. Especially outside larger towns, many people rely on wells, springs, or surface water, and waste disposal is handled with privies, cesspits, or simply dumping, which can contaminate water sources. People understand that foul conditions are linked with illness, but they do not have modern germ theory. So their explanations often focus on bad air, or miasmas. From your bed, you can picture the entire infrastructure of your life like a sketch drawn in charcoal. The well is not far from the house because hauling water is misery. The privy is not far enough because winter wind is misery. And between those two decisions lies a whole universe of risk. You start thinking about where the runoff goes when it rains, where the animals drink, where the children play, how close the pig pen is, how close the neighbor's privy is. It is like your fever has turned you into a paranoid city planner. Joke 1 arrives. Congratulations. You're now thinking about wastewater management as a thrilling hobby, which is exactly what illness does to a person when there is no Netflix. You hear the doctor mention putrid airs at some point, a phrase that makes your stomach turn even before the purge does. He may advise airing out rooms, keeping waste away, burning certain materials to cleanse the air. In towns, during outbreaks of various fevers, people sometimes try to clean streets, remove refuse, improve ventilation, because even without knowing about microbes, they know filth and sickness like each other a little too much. Your household starts noticing patterns. If someone in town drinks from a particular stream and then falls ill, that stream becomes cursed in conversation. If families near a swampy area get recurring fevers, people point to the swamp and call it the source. And they are not entirely wrong, even if they do not know why. Some fevers that plague the colonies are what later generations will recognize as malaria, spread by mosquitoes that love stagnant water and warm seasons. People call it ague, chills, intermittent fever. They blame the air, the damp, the marsh. They avoid certain lowlands in summer, if they can. Historians still argue how quickly colonial communities connected landscape, seasonality, and disease risk in a systematic way, versus relying on folk observation and inherited beliefs. But you, lying there, feel the truth of it in your bones. Where you live can make you sick, and sometimes the map is the diagnosis. Your room smells sharply of vinegar and herbs, but outside, the broader world smells like wet earth, manure, smoke, and human life layered together without modern plumbing to separate the categories. If you live in a city like Philadelphia, New York, or Boston, the streets can be crowded, animals and people sharing space, waste accumulating, water sources stressed. If you live rural, you have space, but you also have wells that can be contaminated, and you depend on your own choices and luck. You begin to hear stories. Someone says there was a bloody flux last year, a terrifying diarrheal illness that swept through households. Someone else says a ship came in with sickness on board. Someone claims the smell by the docks is enough to kill a man. People are mixing accurate observation with dramatic exaggeration, which is, honestly, the most human thing possible. Your caretaker brings you water and hesitates, as if even water has become suspicious. They might sweeten it with a bit of molasses. They might steep it with herbs. They might choose beer or cider instead. Because fermented drinks are often safer than questionable water, even if nobody says it that way. They just say it is strengthening, or more wholesome, or less likely to upset the stomach. Joke 2 drifts in. In this era, hydration is basically a flight of beverages, and water is somehow the sketchiest one on the menu. The chamber pot is emptied carefully. Someone carries it away, trying not to spill, trying not to breathe too deeply, because the smell is considered dangerous. They toss the contents into a privy pit or a designated area. In winter, the ground is hard and the air is sharp. In summer, everything smells louder. You can almost sense the seasonal difference even from your bed, because sickness has seasons too, and your household keeps battling the invisible in the only way they know, with cleanliness rituals that are half hygiene and half protection spell. Clothes are boiled, sheets are scrubbed, floors are swept, the hearth is kept burning. Smoke and heat are believed to purify. Sometimes they do, in their own imperfect way, by drying damp spaces and discouraging certain pests. Sometimes they just make everyone cough. Here is a quirky tidbit that slips in with the smoke. Some people in the 1700s believed that carrying strong scents, like vinegar-soaked sponges or aromatic herbs, can protect them from bad air in crowded places. You can imagine someone walking through a market holding a vinegar rag to their nose like a fashionable accessory, pretending they are not terrified. Your fever lifts and drops. When it lifts, you think too much. When it drops, you feel the ache of exhaustion. Your skin still itches from smallpox, but your mind keeps returning to the house itself as a kind of organism. The well is its mouth. The privy is its gut. The drains are its veins. If those systems fail, the body of the household gets sick. Your caretaker speaks with a neighbor about keeping the yard clean, about not letting animals wander too near the water source, about digging the privy farther if they can. They talk as if they are planning a fence, but they are really planning survival. Everyone is learning through fear. Historians still argue about how much early American public health practices were driven by medical theory versus the practical needs of commerce and urban life, especially in ports. Quarantine rules, waste regulations, and street cleaning often appear when disease threatens trade or crowds. Not just because people care about health. It is easier to motivate a city council with money than with compassion in your smaller world. Though motivation is simpler. It is your life. It is your child's life. It is the terror of seeing someone weaken, dehydrate, and vanish in days from something that begins as a little stomach trouble. Night comes again, and you hear the outside sounds more clearly because fewer people are moving around. A frog croaks near a ditch. Water sits somewhere. You picture mosquitoes rising like smoke. You picture runoff after rain. You picture the well bucket dipping into darkness. You picture hands. Always hands. Touching everything. Joke 3 arrives. Weary and honest. You're starting to understand why wash your hands will someday be revolutionary advice. Because right now, everyone is basically raw-dogging microbiology with confidence. You settle back into the pillow. The smallpox sores throb. The room smells of vinegar and boiled linen. Somewhere outside, the world of water and waste continues its quiet cycle, indifferent to your suffering and intimately connected to it. And you learn the 7th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Even when your illness feels personal, it is often shaped by the ground beneath your feet, the water in your cup, and the messy, unglamorous systems that keep human life from poisoning itself. In a world without pipes and treatment plants, your health is partly architecture, partly weather, and partly luck. The fever does not just sit politely in your body. It has habits. It likes certain hours. It likes certain seasons. And when the air turns cold in 1700s America, Sickness becomes almost predictable in the way it arrives. Like a rude relative who always shows up uninvited but somehow still acts shocked. You're not thrilled to see them. You are lying there with small puck sores tightening and itching. And yet you can still hear the world outside your room, the winter world that makes everyone cough. The wind sneaks through gaps in boards. Smoke hangs low over roofs. People keep windows shut because warmth is precious. They crowd closer to the hearth. They share air, share cups, share blankets, share breath. And in that cozy misery, respiratory illness thrives, even if your case is smallpox. Your household is now thinking about the coughs and colds that always seem to follow a hard season. They are listening to their own throats, clearing them cautiously. They are gauging whether that chest tightness is smoke irritation or the beginning of something worse. They are watching the children like hawks, because children turn a simple sniffle into catastrophe faster than adults like to admit. A mainstream historical fact is that influenza, like epidemics and pneumonia, are common killers in the 18th century, particularly in winter, when crowded indoor living, malnutrition, and smoke exposure contribute to respiratory vulnerability. Without antibiotics or modern supportive care, a winter cough can spiral into life-threatening illness. You feel it yourself in the air. Even your sickroom, with its vinegar and herbs, cannot escape the scent of smoke. The fire is kept going because cold is feared, and cold is seen as a direct cause of illness. People say you catch cold like it is a physical object. They are not entirely wrong in the sense that winter conditions change behavior and exposure, but the mechanism is not what they think. Still, the belief has power. If you shiver, someone piles on blankets. If you sweat, someone worries you will cool too fast and take a chill. It is constant, exhausting babysitting of temperature. You cough once, softly, and the room stiffens. Not because a cough is rare, but because a cough in a sick house is a question mark. Your caretaker leans in, listening, as if your lungs are telling secrets. You cough again, deeper this time, and your chest aches. Smoke, dryness, weakness. Your throat feels scraped raw. Your breathing is slightly faster than it should be, and you can feel your own ribs like a cage. The doctor, when he comes, will likely ask about your breathing. He might press an ear near your chest, or place a hand against your back while you inhale. He will talk about congestion, about inflammation, about catarrh, a word used for mucus and respiratory discharge. He may prescribe expectorants, things to loosen phlegm, or warming tonics to strengthen the lungs. And your household will go right back to the pantry in the hedgerow. They will make honey with lemon if they can get citrus, or honey with vinegar if they cannot. They will steep herbs like horehound, thyme, or sage. They will give you warmed milk with spices. They might rub your chest with something pungent. They might hang a cloth near your face infused with herbs to clear the airways. It is all aimed at easing what they can see and feel, because that is the only evidence they have. Joke one slides in, drowsy but sharp. You're basically being treated like a clogged chimney, which is fitting, because the house and your lungs both run on smoke. In winter, the room itself becomes part of the illness. The air is dry from the fire, then damp when someone opens the door and cold air rushes in. Your skin prickles, your sores itch, your throat burns. Your caretakers try to keep conditions just right, like they are baking bread. Except the bread as you in the oven is anxiety. You begin to notice how malnutrition lurks under the surface of winter sickness. Fresh greens are scarce. Stored food can be monotonous. Some households have plenty. Many do not. A weakened body cannot fight as well. A child with little fat reserves and a constant cough is a child everyone fears losing. People do not call it immune systems. They call it constitution. They say someone is strong or weak, as if health is personality. Historians still argue about the relative importance of nutrition versus exposure, and crowding in winter mortality spikes in early America, especially when records are uneven and diagnoses are fuzzy. But you can feel the truth in the way your caretakers talk about strengthening foods, the way they praise you for swallowing broth, the way they worry when you cannot. One afternoon, you drift into a fever dream where you are walking outside in deep snow, but you cannot feel your feet. You are chasing warmth, chasing breath, and the air hurts your lungs. When you wake, your chest feels tight and your breathing is shallow. Your caretaker lifts your head and urges you to sip something warm. You try, but it is hard. Your throat is a desert. Someone decides to keep the room warmer. Someone else argues that too much heat is bad for smallpox, that it will worsen the eruption. The debate becomes a tiny domestic war, fought with blankets and window cracks. You lie there thinking, through the haze, that you would like to file a complaint with the season. Joke 2 appears. Winter is really out here acting like it invented disease. And honestly, it kind of did. Your family listens for the telltale sounds of worsening respiratory trouble, the rattling in the chest, the wheeze, the wet cough that does not clear. They fear pneumonia, even if they do not use the term the way a modern doctor would. They talk about the lung fever or about a cough settling in the chest. When someone says the cough has settled, it is never good news. It means the illness has stopped wandering and started building a house. The doctor might suggest bleeding again if he believes inflammation is too high. He might suggest blistering the chest to draw out congestion. He might recommend a cordial, alcohol with herbs. To stimulate and warm, he might recommend rest, which is the one thing you are already doing, whether you like it or not. Here is a quirky tidbit that feels oddly intimate. In some places and families, people believe that placing certain objects near the sick, like heated bricks wrapped in cloth at the feet, or a particular kind of wood smoke, can help pull illness out. The foot-warming brick becomes a tiny talisman, a quiet promise of comfort that also feels like ritual. You do feel comfort when someone slides a warm stone or brick near your feet. The heat seeps in slowly, and for a moment your body stops feeling like an enemy. Your toes, cold and numb, wake up, you exhale, and the exhale turns into a cough that makes your throat sting. Still, the warmth helps. Sometimes help is small and still matters. Evening comes, and with it the household's usual dread. Night is when things turn. Night is when fevers spike and breathing gets harder, and people sit in chairs trying not to fall asleep because they are afraid to miss the moment you need them. The fire crackles. Shadows move across the walls. Your smallpox sores itch like a swarm. Your chest feels tight like a belt. Joke 3 arrives. Barely a whisper. You have never understood the phrase long night until you have lived in a century where the night might outlast you. Your caretaker murmurs reassurance, rubbing your arm gently, telling you to breathe slowly. You try. Inhale. Exhale. The air is smoky, but it is air. You cling to it, and as you drift again, you learn the 8th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Winter makes illness feel inevitable because it changes how you live. It packs you indoors, fills your lungs with smoke, thins your diet, and turns a simple cough into a threat that can steal breath faster than anyone can ride for a doctor. Your house keeps breathing around you, and you start to notice that sickness is not evenly distributed. Not everyone faces the same risks, And some dangers are so woven into daily life that people barely pause to name them. Even as your own skin tightens with pox and your lungs argue with smoke, your mind catches on another kind of peril that sits close to the hearth in every household: childbirth. Because in 1700s America, bringing a child into the world is not a sweet little announcement with balloons. It is a medical event that can turn lethal in a single afternoon. And everyone knows it. The way everyone knows winter can kill if you misjudge the weather. You hear it in the voices downstairs, in the way women talk when they think men are not listening. Someone mentions a neighbor who took a fever after lying in, meaning after giving birth. Someone else says the baby lived, but the mother did not. Someone says the midwife was there, and still it happened. That last part is always spoken with a shiver, because it admits the scariest truth. Even when you do everything right, you can still lose. A mainstream historical fact is that maternal mortality and infant mortality are high in the 18th century, and complications like postpartum infections, hemorrhage, and difficult labor are common threats. Midwives are central figures in childbirth care, especially in early America, though by later in the century, more male practitioners, sometimes called man midwives, become involved in certain communities and complicated cases. From your bed, you can picture it. The lying-in room prepared with clean sheets if the household can manage it. Warm water heating at the hearth. The midwife arriving with her own kit, her own experience, her own calm. Women gathering, not just to help, but because childbirth is a community procedure in many places, with knowledge passed mouth to mouth, hand to hand. And underneath it all, the knowledge that the mother's body is about to attempt something brutal and miraculous with no guarantee of success. Historians still argue whether the shift toward more male involvement in childbirth in some regions reflects genuine improvements in technique and tools, or whether it is more about professionalization and social power, with men claiming authority over women's traditional domain. You can feel that tension even in the way people talk. Midwives are respected, but they are also judged. Male practitioners are praised for skill, but they are also distrusted for stepping into a space that is not theirs. In your own house, someone's pregnancy is always a possibility, always on the horizon. A wife, a sister, a neighbor. Women are frequently pregnant in this era, in part because contraception is limited and because large families are both expected and, in a hard world, practical. But frequent pregnancy also means frequent risk. The conversation turns to what happens when childbirth goes wrong. If labor is prolonged, the midwife tries different positions, different approaches, encouragement, patience. Sometimes she uses herbal remedies to stimulate contractions. Sometimes she prays. Sometimes she does both, because why choose one tool when you are desperate? If a male practitioner is called, it can mean trouble. He might bring forceps, though their use and availability varies, and not every community has someone trained or willing to use them. He might bring a more aggressive approach. He might bring the confidence of someone who believes he can intervene, which is both comforting and terrifying. Joke one nudges into your fevered mind. It is like calling in a specialist, except the specialist arrives on horseback with a bag of metal and opinions. And then there is the terror of infection. Childbed fever is a phrase that hangs heavy in the era, even if people do not understand it as bacterial infection spread through unwashed hands. They know it as a sudden fever after birth, a worsening, a smell, a weakness, a slide into death. In your sickroom, already steeped in smallpox fear, the idea of another fever feels like a curse stacked on a curse. People try to prevent it the only way they know. Cleanliness when possible. Fresh linens, airing out the room, herbal washes. But they do not have antiseptic technique as a standardized practice. A midwife might wash her hands out of habit or belief. A doctor might not, or might move from patient to patient, carrying invisible danger, and nobody can see the enemy. So nobody can feel certain. A quirky tidbit slips in here, whispered like gossip. Some communities rely on women healers who combine midwifery with broader medical practice, using plant knowledge and spiritual rituals, and they can become both respected and feared. If a birth goes well, they are praised. If it goes badly, people mutter about curses, bad luck, or hidden sin. The same hands that deliver life can, unfairly, be blamed for death. Joke 2 arrives, dry and sleepy. Imagine being on call for the most dangerous job in the neighborhood and still getting blamed for the weather. Your household's attention to women's health is not just childbirth, it is monthly troubles, vapors, weakness, miscarriages, infertility. These are often spoken of in coded language, because modesty is a social law. Remedies are often private, teas to bring on the courses, poultices for pain, rest and warmth, sometimes bleeding if a physician insists, because apparently bloodletting is the answer to every question in this century. Women's bodies are treated as both powerful and unpredictable, and the medical theories of the time reinforce that. Humoral thinking, combined with cultural ideas about femininity, leads to assumptions about women being more moist or more susceptible to certain imbalances. It is not just biology. It is ideology wearing a doctor's coat. As you lie there, you think about how sickness intersects with who does the labor of care. The women who nurse you are often the same women who will one day be on the bed themselves, surrounded by watchers, fighting for breath and blood and life. They know the risk in their bones. That knowledge makes their touch steadier and their eyes sharper. It also makes them tired in a way that is hard to name. Even in your fever haze, you notice the subtle rules that appear when a woman is about to give birth. Men are often pushed out. The room becomes a women's space. Advice flows freely. Stories are told. The midwife becomes the captain of the ship. The mother becomes both passenger and engine. Historians still argue how much these female networks functioned as sources of empowerment and mutual support versus mechanisms of social control. Because the same women who comfort also monitor. They note who screams too much, who is strong, who is weak, who follows instructions, who does not. Reputation is built in the lying-in room. You cough again, and your caretaker shushes you softly. Not because you are loud, but because she is thinking about how sound carries in a house, and how panic spreads. She adjusts your blanket and offers you a sip of broth. Her hands are practiced. The same hands that might one day hold a newborn will hold your cup today. Joke 3 slips in. Gentle. Your household is basically running a combined hospital and maternity ward with 0 training and 1 kettle. As evening falls, the talk turns to a woman down the road who is close to her time. Your family worries, because smallpox in your house complicates everything. If she goes into labor and needs help, can anyone from your house go? Should they? What if they carry the sickness? What if they refuse and she suffers? Sickness creates moral knots like this, tightening around communities until everyone feels trapped. You realize then that in 1700s America, health is always communal. But women bear a particular burden. They are expected to produce life and preserve it. They nurse the sick. They manage food and cleanliness. They endure repeated pregnancies. And when they fall ill, the household shakes. Because the anchor is suddenly drifting, you lie back. The itch of smallpox still buzzing, the smoke still threading through your breath, and you learn the 9th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Some of the greatest medical danger is not the dramatic epidemic disease everyone fears, but the ordinary, recurring gamble of childbirth, where courage is routine and survival is never guaranteed. Your fever drifts again, and with it comes a new kind of pain that has nothing to do with pox or lungs. It is smaller, sharper, and more humiliating because it sits right in your face and refuses to be ignored. At first, it feels like a dull ache in your jaw, the kind you might blame on clenching your teeth during chills. Then it becomes a pulse, steady as a drum beat, and the pulse starts to climb your cheekbone like it is looking for better views. Tooth pain in the 1700s is not a minor inconvenience. It is a tyrant. You try to ignore it, because you already have enough going on. Your skin itches like 1,000 ants. Your throat is raw. Your body feels like it has been wrung out by every remedy known to man and some known only to desperate grandmothers. And yet your tooth keeps screaming, sharp and private, like it wants its own attention. Someone notices you touching your jaw. They assume it is fever delirium at first. But then you make a noise you cannot hide, and the household immediately pivots, because now there are 2 emergencies in the same bed. The caretaker presses a hand to your cheek and feels the heat. She sucks in a breath, not because she's judging your dental hygiene, but because everyone knows where this can go. A rotten tooth can swell your face. An infection can spread. Pain can strip away sleep until you are weaker than the illness already made you. A mainstream historical fact is that dental disease is widespread in the 18th century, and professional dentistry as a distinct modern field is still developing. Tooth extraction is often the primary treatment for severe tooth pain and infection, performed by barber surgeons, physicians, or anyone with the tools and confidence to pull. Confidence is a key ingredient, and it is not always matched by skill. The doctor might not handle teeth himself, depending on who he is and what he thinks is beneath his dignity. He might recommend drawing the pain with poultices, or he might say the tooth must come out. If the tooth must come out, someone else might be called a barber surgeon, a local practitioner known for pulling teeth, or sometimes just a strong neighbor who has done it before, which is both horrifying and very on-brand for this century. You imagine the scene and your stomach tightens. No sterile room, no anesthetic, no gentle, reassuring assistant telling you to count backward. Just a chair, a towel, and an instrument that looks like it belongs in a blacksmith shop. Joke 1 slips in, because your brain needs an escape hatch. If you survive smallpox only to be defeated by one cranky molar, you would like to speak to the manager of the 1700s. Your caretaker tries household remedies first, because that is what people do. Warm saltwater rinses if you can manage them. Clove if they have it, because clove's numbing properties are known in folk practice, though availability depends on trade and wealth. A poultice of herbs, maybe crushed garlic or onion, pressed against the jaw. Some people suggest tobacco, chewed or applied, because nicotine can dull sensation. Someone offers you a sip of spirits, partly as pain relief, partly as emotional preparation. The pain laughs at all of it. By late afternoon, your cheek feels swollen. The tooth throbs in time with your heartbeat, which is rude because you cannot escape your heartbeat. You cannot sleep. Your fever climbs again, and now nobody knows which pain is driving which. Your family decides to call someone who can pull it. The person who arrives is not a dentist in the modern sense. He is more like a practical specialist. He might cut hair, lance boils, set bones, perform small surgeries. He carries tools wrapped in cloth. He looks at your face and nods as if he has seen this exact misery 1,000 times, because he probably has. Historians still argue how much early dental practice in colonial America improved over the century, given the overlap between barbering, surgery, and folk extraction techniques, and how much outcomes varied wildly depending on individual competence. From your bed, you do not care about the academic debate. You care about whether this man's hands are steady. He asks you to open your mouth. You try. Your jaw trembles. He peers in, prodding the tooth with something that makes you flinch hard enough to see stars. He nods again. "It's bad," he says, which is not new information, but thank you for the poetry. Someone puts you in a chair. Sitting up makes you dizzy, because you're already weak from illness. Your family stands nearby, tense and helpless. The extractor wraps a cloth around the tooth area, perhaps to grip, perhaps to keep blood from spraying, perhaps to give the illusion of control. Then he brings out the tool. It might be a dental key, a terrifying device designed to grip and twist the tooth out, like turning a key in a lock. Or it might be forceps, depending on the practitioner and the region. Either way, it is metal, it is cold, and it is not gentle. Joke 2 appears in a whisper. You're about to experience no-nonsense healthcare, and the nonsense is entirely yours for thinking you had a choice. He positions the tool. Your hands grip the chair arms. Someone tells you to hold still. That instruction is hilarious in a bleak way, because your entire body wants to crawl out of itself. He braces, then pulls. Pain detonates. It is bright and immediate, and impossible to describe without swearing. So you just make a sound that seems to come from the soles of your feet. Your eyes water. Your stomach flips. Your whole body bucks. But hands steady you. The extractor twists, pulls again, and then there is a wet, awful release. The tooth comes free. For a moment, the pain is worse, as if your body is outraged by the audacity. Then it shifts. It becomes a raw ache, but the tyrant pulse is gone. Blood fills your mouth. Someone stuffs cloth into the socket. The extractor holds up the tooth like a trophy, which is not a vibe you asked for. But in this line of work, it is probably how you stay sane. You spit into a basin. Your legs feel weak. Your head spins. You want to lie down, but you also want to never move again. Your family looks at you like you have returned from battle. They speak softly, praising you, as if bravery can plug a bleeding hole in your jaw. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes the scene even stranger. Some people keep extracted teeth as odd keepsakes, or use them in folk practices, believing they can protect against future toothache or be used in charms. You do not know if your family will do this, but you can already imagine someone tucking that tooth away like it is a cursed pebble. The extractor gives instructions. Keep pressure on the cloth. Do not disturb the clot. Drink something warm. Avoid hard food. Do not rinse too vigorously. The advice is practical, even if the method was brutal. He might suggest applying spirits to the area. He might suggest more herbs. He might suggest prayer, which is always the fallback plan. Historians still argue how often tooth infections in this era contributed to systemic illness and death, because records are patchy and symptoms overlap with other diseases. But everyone knows someone who died of a tooth, in the sense that a simple dental problem spiraled into swelling, fever, and decline. That knowledge is why your family did this, even if it felt like medieval punishment. Joke 3. Weak but sincere. You are pretty sure you just paid for that procedure in pain, because currency seems optional when the cost is screaming. They lay you back down. Your mouth tastes of iron and cloth. Your smallpox itch continues, because of course it does. But the jaw pain has shifted into something manageable, a soreness you can endure. You close your eyes and let your body float, exhausted by yet another survival trial. And you learn the 10th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Sometimes the most immediate threat is not the grand epidemic sweeping towns, but the small private agony of a tooth. Because in a world without anesthesia or antibiotics, even your own mouth can become a battlefield you're forced to fight with brute force and faith. With the tooth gone and the smallpox still staging its slow rebellion across your skin, the world outside your bedroom starts seeping back into your awareness. Not because you can get up and stroll around. Absolutely not. But because news travels in 1700s America the way smoke does. It finds cracks. It drifts under doors. It clings to clothing. It arrives on breath. And the biggest crack in every colony's defenses is the port. You hear it first as a story told in the kitchen, then repeated with slight changes like all good rumors. A ship has come in, or a ship is expected, or a ship was turned away. Someone saw a flag. Someone heard a sailor collapsed on the wharf. Someone's cousin works near the docks and says there is fever again. Port cities are where the 1700s feel modern. Crowds, commerce, foreign languages, goods from far away, and with those goods, illnesses from far away. Even when a disease is already present locally, ships can amplify it, carrying infected people, contaminated clothing, and the kind of dense human contact that makes sickness feel like it has wheels. A mainstream historical fact is that colonial port cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston repeatedly face outbreaks of contagious diseases linked to maritime trade and travel. And communities use measures like quarantine, isolation, and inspection to try to manage the risk, even though the medical understanding of transmission is incomplete. From your bed, you picture the docks. Barrels stacked like fort walls. Fish smell mixed with tar, rope and sweat. Sailors stumbling off ships after weeks at sea, weakened, hungry, carrying lice, carrying coughs, carrying stories, and sometimes carrying death. You imagine how quickly a crowded tavern can turn into a petri dish without anyone having the vocabulary to call it that. Your household knows this too. Even rural families talk about the port the way people talk about storms. It is distant, but it can send consequences up every river and road. A merchant brings cloth from the city. That cloth has been handled by dock workers. Those dock workers drank with sailors. Those sailors slept in close quarters with men coughing through the night. The chain is invisible, but the fear is not. Someone mentions quarantine in a tone that mixes approval and annoyance, because quarantine is always both. It protects, and it disrupts. In some places, ships are required to wait for a period, or people suspected of illness are kept apart. Towns might post guards, establish pest houses or isolation huts, and restrict movement. But enforcement is uneven. Money speaks. Merchants complain. Sailors bribe. Officials argue. And illness does not care about regulations. Historians still argue how effective colonial quarantine measures truly were, given the political and economic pressures to keep trade moving, and given the limited ability to identify who was infected before symptoms showed. But communities keep trying, because trying is better than surrendering. Your own house is already doing quarantine in the most basic way, keeping people away, limiting visits, boiling linens. That instinct scales up to cities. In a port town, the equivalent is watching incoming ships, inspecting passengers, and sometimes forcing them to wait offshore like unwelcome ghosts. You hear a story about a quarantine island, a place where ships and people are held. Someone describes it like a prison. Someone else describes it like a lifesaver. Both are right. The sick are separated from the well, but separation is never gentle. Families are split. Work is lost. Goods spoil. Fear hardens into resentment. Joke one slips in. Nothing says, "Welcome to America," like being parked outside the harbor while everyone argues about whether you are a walking catastrophe. Meanwhile, inside your room, your smallpox is moving into its later phases. The pustules feel tight, then begin to dry. Your skin cracks. The itch shifts into soreness. You are still weak, still feverish, but the worst surge may be behind you. That brings a tiny, dangerous hope into the room. People begin to speak in slightly more normal tones. Someone laughs quietly at something unrelated, then immediately looks guilty, as if laughter might jinx you. The doctor visits less dramatically now. He checks your skin, your eyes, your mouth. He tells you to keep clean, to avoid scratching, to let scabs fall naturally. He warns about infection. He may mention scarring in a blunt way. In this era, surviving smallpox can leave a visible record on your face. And that record changes how the world sees you. Beauty standards are not just vanity. They are social currency. A scarred face can mean pity, fear, or assumptions about your past. A quirky tidbit slides in from the wider Atlantic world. Some people use cosmetics or patches, little beauty spots, partly to decorate and partly to disguise scars, especially in cities where fashion is more elaborate. In Europe, this becomes a whole trend, but even in America, people adopt bits of it. You imagine future you with little black patches strategically placed, like you are turning trauma into style. Joke 2. If you are going to be pocked for life, you might as well commit to the aesthetic. Back to the port. The kitchen talk grows more specific. Someone says the city council is debating stricter rules. Someone says merchants are furious. Someone says the newspapers are printing warnings, or at least hints. Because nobody wants panic, but everyone wants to be first to say, "I told you so." In port towns, illness also collides with class. Wealthy families can leave for the countryside during outbreaks. Poor families cannot. Dock workers cannot. Enslaved laborers cannot. The people who keep trade moving are the people who get exposed first and most often. Your household might not phrase it as structural inequality, but they know who gets sick. Historians still argue how much urban mortality patterns in colonial America reflect differences in housing density, nutrition, and occupation versus differences in record keeping and reporting. But again, from your bed, it is simple. The closer you are forced to live to other bodies and waste and commerce, the more you are gambling with your health. Your caretaker returns to wiping your face and hands, a ritual that feels almost sacred now. You can smell the vinegar less intensely. The house is tired of that smell too. The linens are drying by the fire, stiff and clean. Outside, someone passes by quickly without stopping, and you hear the crunch of boots in frost. You think of those ships again, of how a distant coastline can influence your fever, of how a sailor's cough can become a town's funeral, of how the world is larger than your bed, yet somehow presses right against your walls. Joke 3 arrives, soft and sleepy. You cannot travel, but the germs have excellent passports. As night falls, the household speaks of the port with a mixture of awe and suspicion, like it is both opportunity and plague gate. Someone says trade brings prosperity. Someone else says trade brings death. Someone says you cannot have one without the other. The debate never settles, because it never will. You lie there, your skin tender, your body weak, but your mind clearer than it was. And you learn the 11th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Illness is not only born in your body. It rides roads and rivers and ships, carried by commerce and crowding, and in the port cities especially. Health is always negotiating with profit. fear, and the unstoppable motion of the Atlantic world. As your scabs begin to dry and your fever finally starts behaving like it is considering retirement, your house relaxes by a single notch. Not fully. Nobody in the 1700s relaxes fully around illness, because that is how you get surprised by death. But the panic has softened into vigilance. Your caretakers speak a little louder. They stop flinching every time you shift. Someone even dares to plan the week ahead, which feels almost arrogant. And as soon as life starts inching forward again, your mind turns outward, past the ports and their quarantine flags, past the town gossip, into the places where sickness feels less like an invasion and more like a background hum. The frontier, the inland roads, the low, wet lands where people build houses anyway because the soil looks rich and the rivers look useful, and optimism is a powerful drug. They call it the ugh. People say it casually, like it is an old acquaintance they are annoyed to see again. He's got the ugh. She shakes every third day. The chills come like clockwork. In 1700s America, especially in southern colonies and in swampy or riverine areas, intermittent fevers are common. Settlers learn which valleys make you shake and which hills let you breathe. They do not say malaria yet, but that is what many of these fevers likely are. A mainstream historical fact is that intermittent fevers, often referred to as agues, are widespread in parts of colonial America, particularly in regions with wetlands and warm climates, and they shape settlement patterns, labor, and mortality. People often link these fevers to marshy air and seasonal conditions. You can picture the frontier cabin, rough boards, a small window, a roof that leaks, a family trying to farm land that fights back, mosquitoes whining at dusk, water pooling near the house, and then a day when someone starts shivering so hard their teeth chatter like castanets. Even though the air is warm, hours later they sweat through their shirt. Then they feel fine for a while. Then it happens again. Historians still argue how much early American settlers' understanding of miasma and bad air actually helped them avoid malaria-prone areas, because their reasoning was wrong, but their observations were often accurate. They blamed swamp air, yet avoiding swamps does reduce mosquito exposure. Even mistaken theory can produce effective behavior, which is an irritating fact for anyone who loves neat narratives. Your household has heard of quinine, or at least of Jesuits' bark, cinchona bark, an imported remedy used against fevers. If you are wealthy or connected, you might have access to it through trade networks. If you are not, you rely on local substitutes and prayers. The bark is bitter, famously bitter, and it becomes a kind of legend. People talk about it like it is magic, because when it helps, it feels miraculous. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits the frontier mood. Some settlers and travelers carry little packets of bitter powders or tinctures as protective talismans, taking them before entering unhealthy lowlands, the way you might pack an umbrella before a storm. They cannot see mosquitoes in the dark, but they can feel dread, and the medicine becomes a ritual against dread. Joke one slips in. Imagine hiking into the wilderness with a musket, a hat, and a travel-size anti-swamp potion, like you are on a camping trip sponsored by desperation. You have not been on the frontier recently, but sickness makes people tell stories, and you hear them. Someone talks about a cousin who moved inland and got sick every summer. Someone mentions a settlement where the men were too weak to harvest because everyone was shaking with chills. Someone says the land is cursed. Someone else says it is just bad air. Someone, more practical, says it is mosquitoes, even if they do not connect mosquitoes to disease, only to misery. They know the bugs and fevers show up together, like terrible friends. Meanwhile, your own body is still fragile. The smallpox is leaving you marked, tender, and exhausted. You are the kind of person who would not survive the ague on top of this, and you know it. That knowledge makes you strangely grateful for your dry, smoky, imperfect house. Even if it is a germ theater, it is at least not a swamp theater. The doctor, when he visits, speaks of seasons and constitutions again. He might warn you not to overexert as you recover. He might advise staying away from damp night air. He might recommend tonics to restore strength. If he is more worldly, he may mention that certain regions are healthier than others and that people should build on higher ground when possible. That advice is part medical, part folklore, and part hard-won observation. Joke 2 arrives. The 1700s wellness plan is basically move uphill, which would be fine if uphill did not also come with rocks, wolves, and loneliness. You learn that the frontier is not only geography, it is social vulnerability. Out there, doctors are scarce, supplies are scarce, neighbors might be miles away. If you get sick, you cannot easily send for help. A fever can become fatal simply because no one is there to bring water when you are too weak to stand. In town, sickness is a community burden. On the frontier, it can be a solitary sentence. Historians still argue whether frontier mortality was primarily driven by violence, accidents, and food scarcity, or by disease and the lack of medical and social support, because the frontier myth loves to focus on dramatic threats. But disease is often the quiet killer that does not make good heroic stories. It just empties cabins. Your caretaker is folding linens near the fire and talking about someone who went west and never returned. They say it could have been an accident, could have been the Indians, could have been starvation. But then, in a softer voice, they say, could have been fever. That last possibility sits in the air like ash, because everyone knows it is plausible. You think about the way Americans push into new lands anyway. Despite the sickness, despite the risks, the lure of land ownership, of independence, of starting over. The same optimism that builds cabins in mosquito swamps is the optimism that convinces people they can outwork illness. Sometimes they can. Sometimes illness simply waits until they are tired enough to lose. A quirky tidbit drifts in from the edges of folk practice. Some people believe that carrying certain roots or wearing specific plants can ward off ague, and others swear by rituals like walking barefoot in dew or avoiding certain foods during fever seasons. It is a mix of observation, superstition, and the human need to feel in control. Joke 3 slides in, gentle. If you ever hear someone say, just get more sunlight as health advice, remember that in the 1700s they were basically saying, avoid the swamp demons, and it was somehow equally evidence-based. Your recovery continues slowly. You can sit up for longer. You can swallow more food. The tooth socket aches less. Your skin still feels tight, but the worst is fading. And as you regain strength, you understand why the frontier stories matter. They remind you that sickness in this era is not only about what happens to you in bed. It is about where you choose to live, what you choose to build, and what the land itself demands as payment. You listen to the evening sounds outside. A frog again, somewhere near water. A faint buzz. Perhaps a mosquito, even in the colder season. Or maybe just your imagination. You picture the lowlands and the river bends and the swampy edges where ague waits like a seasonal tax. And you learn the 12th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. The landscape is a medical force. Wetlands, rivers, and frontier isolation shape illness as much as any doctor's bag. And even if people do not know the true cause, they learn to fear certain places the way they fear certain diseases. because sometimes the land itself seems to breathe fever into anyone stubborn enough to settle there. When you are sick long enough, you start paying attention to who actually knows how to keep bodies alive. Not who claims authority, not who has the fanciest words, but who can look at a plant, a wound, a fever, and do something that changes the outcome. Your household has been leaning on pantry remedies, on the doctor's lancet, on prayers, on pure stubbornness. And now, as you slowly claw your way back towards something like normal, you hear another kind of knowledge spoken about with a mix of admiration and discomfort. Indigenous healing. It comes up carefully at first, like a topic people do not want to admit they rely on. Someone says, the Indians use a bark for fevers. Someone else mutters, they know the woods. A third voice adds, quietly, that a local native woman once treated a child's sickness when no one else could. The room goes silent for a beat, because that silence holds a contradiction. Colonists often depend on indigenous knowledge while simultaneously dismissing or fearing indigenous people. A mainstream historical fact is that European settlers in North America adopt and learn from indigenous medical knowledge in many ways, especially regarding local plants and treatments, even while colonial conflict, prejudice, and power imbalance distort and limit that exchange. You can almost feel the tension in the way your caretaker speaks. She is practical. She wants you alive. If a remedy works, she will use it. But she also lives in a social world where admitting the source can be complicated. In some communities, borrowing from indigenous medicine is common but rarely credited. In others, it is criticized as heathen or dangerous. Either way, the exchange happens because the forest does not care about politics. Your fever has mostly broken now, leaving you weak, itchy, and marked. Your skin is a patchwork of healing scabs. Your eyes feel sensitive to light. Your mouth is still sore from the tooth, and your appetite is cautious. In this vulnerable state, you listen more than you speak. Someone mentions a plant you have seen before, but never noticed. Sassafras, used for teas and tonics, believed to purify the blood. Someone mentions witch hazel for skin irritation. Someone else mentions yarrow to help with wounds. These are not exclusively indigenous uses, but in many regions, settlers learn about local plants and their applications through contact with native communities. Knowledge passes through trade, through observation, through coerced interaction, through relationships that range from cooperative to violent. It is messy. Historians still argue whether the transmission of indigenous medical knowledge to Europeans was mostly driven by genuine collaboration and shared survival needs, or by opportunistic extraction under colonial pressure. The answer depends on time, place, and the people involved. But the pattern is clear. Settlers adapt, borrow, and sometimes profit from knowledge that is not originally theirs. Your caretaker decides to try something new on your skin because the smallpox scarring worries her. She makes a wash from plant material, something soothing, something a neighbor said the Indians use for irritated skin. It smells green and earthy, like crushed leaves after rain. She dabs it gently onto your cheek, and the coolness eases the tightness. You do not care where it came from. Relief is relief. Joke one slides in. If it works, it works. Your skin does not have a passport. The doctor, if he is the sort who reads and keeps up with new ideas, might mention American remedies as a curiosity. Plants from the New World that European medicine is still cataloging and arguing about. Colonial medicine is a stew of influences. European theory, African knowledge brought by enslaved people, indigenous botanical expertise, and homegrown improvisation. Your body has been treated by all of it, whether anyone admits it or not. Now you hear a story about a trader who travels between settlements and native villages. He claims he has seen healers use sweat lodges for cleansing and recovery, and you picture it. Heat, steam, controlled discomfort meant to drive out illness or restore balance. Settlers sometimes mimic versions of this, creating their own sweating treatments, because again, they love anything that looks like action. Here is a quirky tidbit that drifts in with the steam. Some colonists become fascinated with indigenous practices and blend them into their own medical routines, while others condemn them as superstition, even though their own medicine includes charms, bleeding, and blistering. Humans are not always consistent, especially when they are scared. Joke 2. It is amazing how quickly something becomes unscientific when you do not like the person doing it. Even if you are currently treating fever with a leech and a prayer, your household's relationship with indigenous knowledge is also shaped by distance. If you live near native communities, exchange is more likely. Sometimes peaceful, sometimes tense. If you live farther away, information comes as rumor, distorted and simplified. People turn complex medical traditions into one-liner tips. They use this root for that. The nuance gets lost. The cultural context gets stripped away. A plant becomes just an ingredient. Historians still argue how much of indigenous medicine was misunderstood or misapplied by settlers, because without the broader framework, people might use the right plant for the wrong condition, or prepare it incorrectly, or ignore warnings. Knowledge is not just a list. It is practice, relationship, and understanding. You taste a bitter tea one evening and ask what it is, and someone hesitates, then says a local native man traded the bark for cloth last season. The tea is harsh, almost smoky, and it leaves your mouth dry. But afterward your stomach settles and your head feels less heavy. Your caretaker looks pleased, then quickly looks wary, as if being pleased is politically dangerous. Outside your window, the land sits quiet under winter light. You realize that indigenous people have lived with this land for generations, developing deep knowledge of its plants, seasons, and dangers. Settlers are newcomers, learning fast because they must, but also refusing to fully acknowledge the teachers. It is a hard truth, and it sits uneasily in your recovering mind. Joke 3 arrives softly. You are starting to suspect the real frontier survival kit is not a musket. It is a field guide, and the people who wrote it did not speak English. As you heal, you become more aware of the ways medicine is tied to power. Who gets called a doctor, who gets called a healer, whose remedies are praised and whose are mocked, whose knowledge is written down and whose stays all, whose plants get renamed and sold, whose bodies are studied and whose are dismissed. Your own survival has been a patchwork of help, and that patchwork includes threads your society pretends are not there. Your caretaker keeps applying the plant wash. Your scabs soften and fall. The marks remain, but they are less angry now, more like a map you will carry. The house begins to smell more like food again, less like vinegar and fear. Someone talks about you sitting outside soon, in sunlight, to regain strength. And as you imagine stepping into that light, you learn the 13th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Healing knowledge is everywhere, not just in the doctor's bag. It lives in the land and in the people who know the land, and even when society tries to keep boundaries rigid. Sickness ignores those boundaries, forcing uneasy exchanges where survival matters more than pride. You are finally strong enough to sit by the window for a while, wrapped in a blanket like an old man pretending it is a fashion choice. The sunlight feels almost sharp after so many days in smoke and shadow. Your skin still tightens where scabs have fallen. Your face feels unfamiliar under its new texture, and your mouth aches in that hollow way a missing tooth announces itself. But you are here, breathing, watching, and the view from this window is not just trees and snow and a neighbor's fence. It is the structure of your world. Who walks freely? Who walks watched? Who is allowed to be sick with sympathy? And who is sick as a problem to be managed? Because in 1700s America, illness does not land on everyone equally. You have lived through fear, care, and community help. Now you start noticing, even in the casual conversations downstairs, how different sickness sounds when it belongs to the enslaved. Your caretaker mentions a man on a nearby plantation who is down with fever. The tone is strange. Not panicked, not tender, more like a report about a broken tool. Someone else says, they cannot afford to lose him. And you realize they mean it literally. His health is measured in labor. His body is inventory. A mainstream historical fact is that enslaved people in 18th century America experience harsh health conditions shaped by forced labor, inadequate housing and nutrition, exposure to disease, and limited access to humane care. Plantation owners often frame health in terms of economic value, while enslaved communities develop their own networks of healing knowledge and care under oppression. You hear the word doctor used differently here too. An enslaved person might be seen by a physician if the owner believes it is worth the cost. Or they might be treated by overseers with crude remedies, or left to recover on their own, or punished for being lazy if illness slows them. Even when care happens, it is rarely centered on comfort. It is centered on returning the body to work. Historians still argue about the degree to which some enslavers provided medical care out of paternalistic ideology versus purely economic calculation, and how much variation existed between regions and individual plantations. But the overarching reality is brutal. The enslaved do not control their own care, their own rest, or their own bodies. You taste that truth in the stories. Someone says an overseer bled a sick woman because he read it in a book. Someone says a child died because no one wanted to waste supplies. Someone says the enslaved have their own healers, people who know plants, roots, and ritual, and that owners sometimes rely on them while simultaneously fearing them. That fear has a particular flavor, the fear of power that is not authorized. Here is a quirky, tense tidbit that surfaces in whispers. Enslaved healers and midwives can be both valued and suspected, because their knowledge gives them influence in the quarters, and influence can look like threat to people who believe control is safety. Some enslavers accuse healers of conjure or poisoning when outcomes go bad, or when they simply want an excuse to punish. Healing becomes politically dangerous. Joke one slips in, dry and sad. In a world where you own people, you somehow still manage to be shocked. They have knowledge you do not control. From your window, you watch an enslaved man pass at a distance, carrying something heavy, shoulders slightly hunched. He moves with that careful efficiency of someone who cannot afford to waste energy. You wonder what happens when he is sick. Does anyone sit by his bed? Does anyone count his breaths at night? Or does illness mean he is left alone until he can stand again? Because labor does not pause. Enslaved communities do build care networks because they must. They share remedies, nurse each other, pass down plant knowledge from Africa, from indigenous contacts, from whatever works in the new land. They practice midwifery. They treat wounds. They comfort, they grieve, they do all the human things, but under a system designed to deny their humanity. Medicine becomes both survival and quiet resistance. A mainstream truth is that African medical knowledge influences colonial healing practices in many places, though it is often uncredited or dismissed. You have already seen how indigenous knowledge slips into your household. Enslaved knowledge does too, sometimes through direct contact, sometimes through rumor, sometimes through the way a remedy simply spreads because it helps. People borrow the plant, ignore the person. Historians still argue how much of enslaved medical practice can be reconstructed from records written by enslavers, physicians, and observers who often misunderstood or biased what they saw. The sources are crooked mirrors, but the outlines are there. Healers, midwives, herbalists, spiritual practitioners, all operating in a space where care and danger overlap. You hear about sick houses on plantations, places where sick enslaved people are gathered, sometimes for containment, sometimes for convenience, sometimes for both. The idea sounds almost humane until you picture the reality. Crowded, undersupplied, watched by people who may not care if you are comfortable. It is not a hospital. It is a holding pen for labor to recover. Joke 2. Faint and uneasy. Imagine calling it a hospital when the discharge plan is simply back to work, please, and try not to die. Your own recovery is slow, but supported. You are fed. You are kept warm. People check on you. You realize how much that care is tied to your status. If you were enslaved, your smallpox might have spread through cramped quarters. Your isolation would be impossible. Your rest would be contested. Your pain would be treated as inconvenience. Even your scars would mean something different. Not a social blemish, but a mark on property. And then there is the cruelest intersection of sickness and slavery. Reproduction. Enslaved women's childbirth is not just family. It is economics. A baby is another enslaved person under the laws of many colonies and later states. That means pregnancy and birth are coerced, controlled, and exploited. Midwives in the quarters carry enormous responsibility, trying to keep mothers alive in conditions that are often stacked against them. You hear someone say, casually, that a woman lost her baby and was back in the fields in days. The sentence lands like a stone. In your own sick room, people fuss over your broth intake somewhere else. Grief is not given time to breathe. Historians still argue about how enslaved families navigated illness and caregiving under constant disruption, including sale, punishment, and forced relocation. But again, the core truth is clear. The system makes ordinary care heroic, because every act of nursing is happening inside a cage. Here is another quirky, sharp-edged detail. Some enslaved people use certain plants or practices to manage fertility, to resist forced reproduction, or to protect their bodies in small private ways. This knowledge is deeply sensitive and often recorded only through hostile or voyeuristic sources. But the fact that it exists speaks to a grim reality. When your body is owned, controlling your own biology becomes an act of defiance. Joke 3 arrives. Not really a joke. More like a breath of bitter irony. The people who claim you are less than human spend an awful lot of effort trying to control exactly how human you are. As dusk falls, the light through your window softens. You watch smoke rise from chimneys, smell dinner cooking, hear a distant call. Your house feels warm, protected, imperfect but held together by care. And in that warmth, the contrast becomes sharper, because you can see the shape of the wider world more clearly now. You understand that sickness is not just biology. It is policy. It is labor. It is who is allowed to rest. It is who gets believed. It is who gets comfort. In 1700s America, the same fever can mean community support for one person and punishment for another. You lean back, tired again, and you learn the 14th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. For enslaved people, illness is not merely a threat to life. It is a negotiation with a system that treats bodies as tools. where care is rationed by profit and power, and where healing, when it happens, often comes from within the enslaved community itself, stitched together in secrecy, courage, and stubborn love. Your strength comes back in small, stubborn increments. One day you can stand long enough to shuffle to the chair. Another day you can eat without the whole room applauding like you just won a medal. Your skin stops feeling like it is being stretched over hot gravel. The house stops smelling like vinegar and crisis. Life begins to creep into ordinary patterns again, which is comforting, until you realize ordinary patterns include people quietly losing their minds. Not in the dramatic, stagey way, in the slow, damp way, like wood rotting behind a wall. Someone in your community is melancholy, the word spoken like a weather forecast. Another person has the vapors, a phrase that is both vague and oddly judgmental. A man is said to have nerves, and everyone laughs softly as if nerves are a punchline. A woman is described as hysterical, and the word carries a loaded weight, implying her body is the problem, not her life. You are recovering from a physical illness. But now you begin noticing how the 1700s treats the invisible illnesses that do not leave scabs you can point to. A mainstream historical fact is that 18th century Anglo-American society often interprets mental distress through a mix of medical ideas, like nerves, humors, and melancholia. Religious frameworks, sin possession, moral weakness, and social norms, with care ranging from family support to confinement, and with asylums beginning to develop more formally toward the end of the century in some places. You hear these terms tossed around in kitchens and taverns. He's not right. She's taken to her bed. He talks to himself. She cries for no reason. He's violent when he drinks. People notice patterns, but they do not have modern categories. They do not say depression, anxiety, PTSD. They say melancholy, madness, lunacy. They say touched. They say distempered. The language makes it sound like a stain. Your own brush with fever has left you jumpy. Loud sounds make you flinch. Certain smells, like vinegar, make your stomach tighten. You wake at night with a sudden fear that your skin is erupting again. You are not imagining it. This is what surviving a close call does. Your body remembers danger even after the danger passes. But in this era, nobody would call that trauma. They might call it weak nerves. They might suggest you need strengthening tonics. They might suggest prayer. They might suggest you stop thinking so much, which is classic advice from people who have never tried to stop thinking. Joke one slips in. The 1700s mental health plan is basically, have you tried not being sad? And you want to bite someone, but you are missing a tooth now. So it is less effective. Your caretaker mentions a man in town who has been unsettled since the war. Maybe the French and Indian War earlier in the century. Maybe a local conflict. Maybe violence on the frontier. He drinks. He shouts in his sleep. He cannot hold work. People call him unreliable. They do not connect his behavior to what he saw. They connect it to his character. In a society that values stoicism and productivity, emotional damage is often treated as a moral failure. Historians still argue how much early American communities recognized links between extreme experiences and later mental distress, versus interpreting symptoms primarily through religious and moral lenses. The records show both compassion and cruelty, sometimes in the same person. Women get their own special category of blame. The vapors is a popular explanation for a wide range of symptoms, from fainting to anxiety to sadness to frustration that has nowhere to go. Hysteria is tied to beliefs about the womb, about female bodies wandering and causing trouble, which is scientifically nonsense but socially useful for dismissing women's pain. If a woman is overwhelmed by childbirth after effects, grief, or relentless labor, the label can turn her into a spectacle rather than a person. Meanwhile, men who break down might be called mad, but also sometimes excused as having melancholy in a more romantic sense, especially among educated circles. The same suffering gets different interpretations depending on gender and class, which is infuriatingly consistent across centuries. You hear about someone being put away, confined in a room at home, or sent to a local jail, because the line between mental illness and criminality is blurry in practice. There are early institutions and madhouses in the Atlantic world, but in much of 1700s America, the family handles it until they cannot. When they cannot, confinement becomes the solution. Not because it heals, but because it protects others and reduces public disruption. A quirky tidbit that slips in like a cold draft. Some people believe the phases of the moon influence madness, hence lunacy. And they watch lunar cycles the way you watch weather patterns, expecting behavior to shift. Even if it is superstition, it shapes how communities interpret episodes. If someone acts out on a full moon, the story becomes sticky and self-reinforcing. Joke 2. Imagine being genuinely distressed, and everyone's response is to blame the sky. You find yourself thinking about the doctor's humoral framework again. If illness is imbalance, then mental illness is also imbalance. Too much black bile, they might say, causing melancholy. Too much heat, causing mania. Treatments follow that logic. Bleeding to calm, purging to clear, opiates or alcohol to soothe, tonics to strengthen nerves. Some people are given laudanum, opium tincture to quiet the mind. It can help, and it can also trap people in dependence, which nobody will talk about openly because it is medicine, and medicine is supposed to be virtuous. Religious responses are everywhere too. People pray, fast, seek counsel. Sometimes faith is comfort. Sometimes it becomes pressure, because if your distress is framed as spiritual weakness, then suffering becomes evidence of sin. That can crush a person who is already crushed. Historians still argue whether the rise of moral treatment ideas, which emphasize kindness, routine, and humane care in later periods, had roots in earlier 18th century practices, or was a sharper break. But you can see early hints, even now. Some families try to soothe rather than punish, to include rather than isolate. They walk with the distressed person. They keep them busy. They keep them safe. It is imperfect, but it is love trying to operate without a map. You sit by the window again, and you watch ordinary life. A boy runs past. A woman carries water. A man hauls wood. Everyone looks healthy until you remember that health is often performance. People hide what they can because reputation matters. If you are known as mad, opportunities shrink. Marriage prospects fade. Trust dissolves. Community support, which saved you during smallpox, can turn into community rejection when the illness is in the mind. Joke 3. Soft and not entirely joking, the town will boil linens for your fever. But it cannot boil out shame. Your own mind feels fragile at times. The memory of itching, of fever dreams, of the tooth extraction, returns in flashes. You find yourself replaying the sound of the lancet, the sight of blood in the basin. Your heartbeat speeds up for no reason. Your caretaker calls it nerves, and she is not wrong. But the word feels too small for what it is. You are learning that sickness leaves residues, not just scars on skin, but grooves in the mind. Your family wants you back to work soon, not because they are cruel, but because the world demands labor. But you can sense their hesitation. What if you relapse? What if you become weak in a way that is not visible? They do not have language for post-illness fatigue, but they know the shape of it. They call it being run down. They call it a lingering weakness. They recommend tonics and fresh air and moderate activity, which is surprisingly reasonable advice for a century that also loves leeches. And then you learn how mental distress is often wrapped into social control. A woman who speaks too loudly is hysterical. A man who refuses church is possessed. A person who does not conform is mad. Labels become tools. In that way, the line between healthcare and discipline blurs. You breathe in the cold air from the cracked window. It stings your lungs lightly, but it also feels clean. You let your mind quiet. You listen to the household sounds, to the reassuring clatter of ordinary tasks. You are alive, you are recovering, and you are becoming more aware of the quieter illnesses that people carry without scabs, without fever, without obvious permission to rest. So you learn the 15th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. The body is not the only battlefield. Minds break too, and the era's tools for that kind of sickness are often language that shames, treatments that restrain, and communities that do not know whether to comfort or control, leaving the suffering person trapped between fear, faith, and a world that demands they appear right even when they are not. By the time your strength returns enough to take a few slow steps without needing to sit down like a fainting aristocrat, you start noticing hazards everywhere. Not just disease hazards, physical ones, the kind that do not need a virus or a fever to ruin you. Just one bad moment with an axe, one slip on ice, one horse deciding it has personal goals. Life in 1700s. America is full of sharp edges, and when you live among sharp edges long enough, surgery becomes less like a rare event and more like an ugly companion that might show up at any time. You hear about a man who crushed his hand while splitting wood, another who fell from a ladder and broke his leg, a child who grabbed a hot pot and blistered skin off their palm, a farmer who caught his thigh on a scythe and bled into the field before anyone could tie cloth around it. Accidents are common because daily life is physical. Tools are heavy, and safety standards are mostly try not to die. A mainstream historical fact is that 18th century surgery in America is limited by the lack of anesthesia and antisepsis, making speed and experience crucial. Barber, surgeons, and physicians perform procedures like amputations, wound care, abscess drainage, and fracture setting, with high risk of infection and complications afterward. You have already tasted a small slice of this world with your tooth extraction. That was the appetizer. Real surgery is the main course nobody orders. Your doctor's bag, you realize now, is not just for bleeding and powders. It can contain saws, knives, forceps, needles, tools designed to cut, clamp, and stitch. When you picture them, your skin tightens in sympathetic horror, not because you are squeamish, though, yes, you are squeamish now. Congratulations, but because you know what comes with those tools, pain you cannot escape, and infection you cannot see. Historians still argue how much the high mortality associated with certain procedures in this era is attributable to the surgery itself versus the conditions afterward, when wounds become infected in environments full of bacteria. But from the patient's perspective, it all blends together into one terrifying truth. The blade is only the beginning. Your household talks about mortification, a word that does not mean embarrassment here, though it will absolutely embarrass you too. It means tissue dying, gangrene, the blackening of flesh after a bad wound. People fear it like they fear a curse. They talk about the smell, the spread, the way a limb can become a threat to the whole body. When mortification sets in, amputation becomes a race against time. You picture the scene because people describe it, and description is contagious. A table cleared, strong men summoned, not for medical expertise, but for holding the patient still. Cloths boiled if anyone thinks to do it. Rum poured for courage. The surgeon sharpening a saw with the calm focus of a carpenter. Because in a way, he is. Joke 1 slips in, dry as dust. The 1700 surgical consent form is basically, hold him down. You can almost feel the terror in your own chest, even though you are not the one being cut right now. No anesthesia means pain is raw and absolute. Patients bite leather, scream, faint, pray, curse, or all four. Surgeons become prized for speed. A good surgeon is not the one with the gentlest bedside manner. A good surgeon is the one who can remove a limb quickly enough that shock does not kill you before infection does. And yet, surgeons in this era are not monsters. Many are deeply practical, sometimes compassionate, always aware of their limits. They have seen bodies fail. They have seen infection turn a clean cut into a death sentence. They might not know about bacteria, but they know wounds can go bad, and they sometimes try to prevent it with washing, with alcohol, with cauterizing, with poultices, with whatever they believe keeps rot away. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes your skin crawl. Some surgeons use cautery, burning tissue to stop bleeding or seal wounds. And while it can control hemorrhage, it also adds trauma. Imagine surviving an amputation and then being branded like meat, and having to pretend this is reasonable medicine. Joke 2 arrives, weak and horrified. If anyone ever tells you the 1700s were simpler times, you're going to hand them a saw and invite them to demonstrate. You also learn that surgery is often public, not in the sense of an operating theater like later centuries, but in the sense that a house fills with witnesses. People come to help restrain, to assist, to pray, to gossip, to reassure themselves they are not the one on the table. Privacy is a luxury. Pain is communal. Even minor procedures are intense. Lancing an abscess, setting a bone, stitching a wound. These happen without numbing. The surgeon might give laudanum or alcohol, but it is crude. Patients endure by gripping someone's hand until their knuckles go white. Historians still argue about how frequently surgical interventions were attempted in rural colonial settings versus simply avoided, because many people likely chose to live with disabling injuries rather than risk a procedure. A broken bone might heal crooked. A hernia might be tolerated. A tumor might be ignored until it kills. The calculus is brutal. Intervention can shorten life as easily as it can save it. Your own body, still recovering from smallpox, feels newly vulnerable to this reality. You cannot afford to get hurt. You cannot afford infection. You cannot afford another cascade of suffering. And yet, you live in a world where work demands risk. If you are a farmer, you handle blades daily. If you are a sailor, you climb rigging and haul rope. If you are a laborer, you lift, cut, carry. The body is constantly placed in harm's way because survival depends on using it. You hear about someone who lost a leg and now uses a crude wooden prosthesis. They hobble, but they live. People speak of them with a mix of pity and admiration, because disability is common and visible. Communities adapt. Sometimes they assign lighter work. They offer help. They also judge, because they always judge. A disabled person can become a burden in a world where every hand matters. Joke 3 slides in. Softer. Your big recovery goal is no longer running a mile. It is not getting sawed. As evening settles, you sit near the fire, not too close, because your skin is still tender, but close enough to feel human warmth. The doctor visits briefly, checks your healing, tells you to keep your strength up, to avoid exertion. The advice sounds almost quaint until you remember that exertion is what feeds the household. Avoiding exertion is like avoiding breathing. You think about the next time someone in your community gets injured, how quickly the household will shift, how the table will clear, how cloth will be torn into strips, how a surgeon will arrive with tools that look like they belong in a workshop, how everyone will hold their breath and hope the patient does not die of shock, and if they survive the cut, hope they do not die of infection afterward. And you learn the 16th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Surgery is not a clean, controlled solution. It is a desperate negotiation with pain and time, where speed is mercy, infection is the real predator, and survival often depends less on the blade itself than on whether your body can endure what comes after. Once you can walk across the room without feeling like your legs are made of wet paper, you start hearing the outside world again in full color, the clang of a pot, the creak of a cart, the distant shout of someone selling something. And in 1700s America, someone is always selling something, especially when people are scared. Because fear is a market, word reaches your household that a traveling man is coming through, the kind who sets up near a tavern or a crossroads and draws a crowd with a voice that could wake the dead. He brings bottles, he brings pamphlets, he brings promises, he brings the comforting illusion that illness can be purchased away with a coin and a swallow. Your caretaker rolls her eyes when she hears it, but she still listens, because even skeptical people want hope when the local doctor's best tool is a lancet and a shrug. And you, fresh from smallpox and tooth-pulling and weeks of being treated like a leaky barrel, are not exactly overflowing with faith in official medicine either. A mainstream historical fact is that the 18th century sees widespread use of patent medicines and itinerant sellers of remedies in Britain and the American colonies, with products marketed as cures for many ailments. These sellers thrive because medical care is inconsistent, expensive, and often ineffective, and because regulation is limited. The traveling medicine show is not always a literal show with music and tricks, but it often has performance baked in. The man arrives with a wagon, maybe painted with bold letters. He sets up bottles that catch the light. He talks about distant training, secret formulas, exotic ingredients. He names diseases like he is reading them off a menu. Fever, ague, flux, gout, cough, worms, female complaints, nervous disorders. He claims his elixir handles all of it, which is a strong clue that it handles none of it. Historians still argue about whether these patent medicines should be seen purely as cynical frauds or as a kind of informal healthcare system that sometimes provided real relief through ingredients like alcohol, opium, or herbal stimulants. The uncomfortable truth is that some of these bottles work in the sense that they sedate you, or make you poop, or numb pain, which can feel like healing when you are desperate. Your household debates whether to go see him. Someone says it is nonsense. Someone says a neighbor swears by it. Someone says the neighbor also swears by burying onions under the doorstep. So maybe do not use him as a reference. Your caretaker says she will go just to listen, which is how people accidentally buy things. You cannot go. Not yet. But you can imagine the scene. A ring of townsfolk, children on tiptoe, men with arms crossed, pretending they are too smart to be impressed while leaning in anyway. Women listening sharply, because they are often the ones managing sickness at home, and they know the cost of false hope. The seller starts with a story. They always do. He tells of a miraculous recovery. He tells of a nobleman cured. He tells of a sailor saved from death's door. He tells of an indigenous secret, or an African mystery, or an old European royal formula, borrowing exoticism to make the bottle feel bigger than its glass. He holds up a vial and lets the sun turn it into liquid gold. He might even swallow some himself to prove it is safe, which is a neat trick when the main ingredient is often alcohol. Joke one slips in. It is basically influencer culture, but with more horses and fewer disclaimers. Then comes the sales pressure. Limited supply. Only today. Do not let your family suffer. People reach for coins. The man smiles. The man talks faster. The man stacks promises like firewood. You can almost hear the crowd's desire humming. They do not just want medicine, they want control. Your caretaker returns later with a small bottle wrapped in cloth, looking annoyed with herself. She claims she bought it just in case, which is the universal phrase meaning, I was persuaded. She describes the taste. Sweet at first, then sharp, then bitter. It smells like spirits. She says the man claimed it was a cure for pestilential fevers and all manner of eruptions, which is exactly what you had. So of course it sounded perfect. You look at the bottle and feel two opposite emotions at once. Part of you wants to smash it, because you have already suffered enough without being scammed. Part of you wants to drink it, because what if it helps? Desperation makes you gullible even when you are proud of being sensible. A quirky tidbit slides in here. Many patent medicines are sold with printed broadsides or little pamphlets, sometimes including testimonials, sometimes including elaborate claims, sometimes including pseudo-scientific language. This printed marketing spreads quickly in a world where newspapers and printing shops are expanding. You might not have a radio, but you do have propaganda in your hands. Historians still argue about how the rise of print culture in the colonies amplified medical misinformation as well as useful health advice. Because the same presses that spread sermons and political essays also spread miracle cure advertisements. Information becomes more abundant, but not necessarily more accurate. Your caretaker offers you a spoonful. You sniff it. It smells like someone dissolved a candy in whiskey and then had a regrettable idea. Still, you swallow a small amount. Because curiosity is a disease too. It warms your throat, then your stomach, then your head. Not healing, exactly, but a gentle blur that feels like relief. If there is opium in it, it might soften pain. If there is alcohol, it will calm the mind. If there are herbs, they might stimulate or sedate. The bottle's magic is often just chemistry plus timing. Joke 2 arrives. Congratulations. You have discovered the ancient medical principle of, if you cannot cure it, at least be a little bit buzzed. The household watches for changes. You sleep more deeply. Your itching feels less sharp. Your mood lifts slightly. Everyone nods like the medicine is working, but you also know you are already improving. The smallpox was already running its course. The bottle is arriving at the moment hope is easiest to attach to something. This is why these sellers thrive. Illness has natural ebbs. People take a remedy at the low point, then rise naturally, and the remedy gets credit. People take a remedy at the high point and die, and the disease gets blamed. Humans are excellent at pattern making even when the patterns are wrong. Your doctor, when he hears about the bottle, reacts with predictable disdain. He warns against quackery. He warns about unknown ingredients. He might even threaten to report the seller, though enforcement is limited and rivalry is common. Doctors and itinerant sellers compete not just for money, but for authority. Each thinks the other is dangerous. Joke 3. Soft and sleepy. It is like watching two questionable restaurants argue about food safety while you just want soup. You begin to see the medicine show as a symptom of the era's medical landscape. Doctors are scarce in rural areas. Treatments can be harsh. Outcomes are uncertain. People want something gentler, something convenient, something affordable, something they can hold in their hand and feel like they own. A bottle fits that desire perfectly. And yet, not every traveling seller is pure fraud. Some carry useful herbal knowledge. Some bring imported medicines like cinchona bark. Some genuinely believe in what they sell. The problem is the same as always, without consistent standards. Belief and effectiveness are not the same. As the days pass, the bottle sits on the shelf like a little glass promise. Your caretaker uses it sparingly now, partly because it is precious and partly because she is not sure if it is safe. The label, if it has one, is vague. The seller is gone. If it harms you, he will never know. If it helps you, he will never know either. He will just keep moving, selling hope by the spoonful. You breathe more easily now. You can step outside for a few minutes, bundled up, blinking at the brightness. The air feels crisp and real. The village noises wrap around you like a returning world. And somewhere out there, the traveling seller is already setting up again, announcing cures to another crowd that is just as scared as yours was. So you learn the 17th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America, when official medicine is scarce, expensive, and sometimes brutal. The gap fills with showmen and bottles, and in that gap, hope becomes a commodity. Relief can masquerade as cure, and the line between healer and hustler blurs until all you can really measure is whether the person you love feels better after the spoon goes down. The bottle from the traveling man sits on a shelf like a tiny idol, catching light whenever someone passes. And you notice how often people glance at it without realizing they are doing it, not because it is beautiful, but because it represents something the 1700s cannot give consistently: certainty. You keep getting stronger, slowly. But every step back toward normal life is shadowed by the question everyone in your household carries. Why did you get sick? Not in the practical sense of exposure, though people talk about that too, but in the cosmic sense, the moral sense, the religious sense. In 1700s America, illness is rarely just biology. It is meaning. It is a message people think they have to decode. You sit near the fire one evening, wrapped in your blanket, and hear the topic arrive like it always does, disguised as concern. Someone says God spared you for a reason. Someone else says the fever was a trial. Someone says the pox was a warning. Someone says you should be more grateful. Someone says you should examine your life. And you, half amused and half exhausted, realize that sickness has turned you into a sermon illustration. A mainstream historical fact is that religious interpretations of illness are widespread in 18th century America, especially in communities shaped by Protestant traditions, where sickness can be seen as a test, a punishment, or a call to repentance, even as people also pursue practical medical treatments. Your local minister might visit, depending on the community and the level of fear about contagion. If he comes, he stands at a respectful distance, voice soft, asking about your soul as much as your symptoms. He offers prayer. He offers scripture. He offers the one thing he is trained to offer, a story that makes suffering fit into a pattern. For some people, that pattern is comfort. For others, it is pressure. You notice that prayer in your house is not one thing. There are the formal prayers, the ones that sound practiced, and then there are the whispered prayers at night, the bargains. Let him live and I will. People promise things. They promise better behavior, more church attendance, fewer arguments, less drinking. It is the spiritual version of buying a patent medicine bottle, an attempt to exchange something for control. Joke one drifts in. Apparently, your immune system now requires a moral upgrade outside the house. The community responds with its own blend of compassion and judgment. Some neighbors bring food and leave it at a distance, which is kindness. Some neighbors stay away and act like they are being virtuous about it, which is fear dressed as righteousness. Some neighbors talk. They talk about what you did before you got sick. They talk about whether you invited illness by traveling, by socializing, by being careless, by sinning. Humans love to believe suffering is earned because the alternative is terrifying. Historians still argue how strongly religious revival movements in the 18th century shaped everyday interpretations of disease and misfortune, versus how much people's views varied by denomination, region, and personal temperament. But you can feel the cultural gravity of it. Illness becomes a moral mirror, whether you asked for one or not. You also notice how sickness affects your social standing. Surviving smallpox can make you seem tough, chosen, spared. It can also make you seem contaminated, marked. Some people will treat you as a walking relic of danger. Others will treat you as lucky. In either case, they are not just seeing you, they are seeing a story. The minister might suggest that your recovery is a sign you should change something. Be more charitable. Be more temperate. Be more humble. Stop gambling. Stop arguing. Stop skipping worships. For the minister, your body is not just a body. It is a lesson plan, your caretaker, who has been the practical backbone of your survival, listens with polite attention, then goes right back to boiling linens and feeding you broth, because she does not have time for cosmic debates when there are actual chores. Her faith is real, but it is also grounded. She prays and scrubs. She bargains with God in the laundry. Here is a quirky tidbit that slips in with the candlelight. In some communities, people keep days of fasting and prayer during outbreaks. Collective religious responses meant to appease divine anger or seek protection. These days can bring people together in shared fear and shared ritual, even as they also reinforce the idea that illness is a public moral issue. Joke 2. Nothing says public health policy like everyone skipping lunch to impress God. But faith is not only pressure. Sometimes it is the only comfort people have. When medicine fails and bodies fail, faith offers language for grief. It offers community rituals. It offers the idea that suffering is not meaningless. In a world where children die, women die in childbirth, and fevers sweep through towns, people need a framework that does not shatter under the weight of randomness. Providence becomes that framework. And yet, you see the sharp edge too. If sickness is punishment, then the sick are guilty. If the sick are guilty, then help becomes conditional. Sympathy becomes a moral verdict. People might still bring soup, but they bring it with an opinion attached. Historians still argue whether religious frameworks in early America generally increased communal care during illness through charity and mutual obligation, or whether they sometimes increased stigma by framing sickness as evidence of moral failure. The answer, as usual, is both. Humans are perfectly capable of being compassionate and judgmental in the same breath. You begin to feel the weight of gratitude because everyone tells you to. Gratitude is expected, and you do feel it, honestly. But you also feel something else. Anger. Not loud anger, but a quiet resentment that you had to suffer to become a lesson. That your pain became material for gossip and preaching. That your scars are now public symbols. You did not volunteer to be a spiritual object. Joke 3 arrives. Soft and sleepy. You would like to recover without also signing up for a lifetime membership in the town's morality club. As you regain strength, you try to return to work. Slowly. People watch you. They comment on your appearance. They ask how you are feeling with the kind of polite curiosity that is half care and half reconnaissance. You sense which questions are sincere and which are about calculating whether you are safe to be near. You also notice the way religious life itself adapts to illness. Families pray at home when they cannot attend church. Communities avoid gatherings during outbreaks, then rush back when danger fades, as if trying to reclaim normalcy. Ministers preach about epidemics, about divine wrath, about mercy. Sometimes they encourage cleanliness and caution in the same sermon, blending practical advice with spiritual framing. The pulpit becomes an early public messaging system, for better or worse. Your scars continue to heal. They itch less. They fade from angry red to pale. Your missing tooth becomes part of your face, a new asymmetry you will joke about someday. Probably. You feel the sun again. You hear laughter again. You almost feel normal. But you do not forget how quickly the community's tone changed when smallpox was suspected. How fear rewrote relationships. How moral narratives rushed in to explain what nobody truly understood. How people tried to turn a virus into a verdict. So you learned the 18th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Illness is never just a medical event. It is a social and spiritual drama, where prayer can comfort and also accuse, where communities feed you and also judge you, and where your body becomes a canvas onto which everyone paints meaning, whether you want that meaning or not. The first time you finish a bowl of food without your stomach staging a protest, your household reacts like you just brought peace to the colonies. Someone smiles too widely. Someone says, "Look at that," as if your appetite is an unexpected miracle. Someone immediately decides the moment must be celebrated with more food, because that is how people love in the 1700s. They try to feed you back into existence, and you learn quickly that in this era, diet is not just nourishment. It is medicine. It is theory. It is a moral philosophy with a spoon. Your caretaker brings you broth. Again, because broth is the universal bridge between dying and living. Thin at first, then richer. Chicken if you have it. Beef if you can spare it. Sometimes just bones boiled until the water tastes faintly of animal and comfort. Bread soaked in it. A little salt. Maybe a pinch of herbs. It is gentle. And gentle feels precious after weeks of being bled, purged, blistered, and generally treated like a misbehaving barrel of fluids. A mainstream historical fact is that 18th century medical advice commonly includes dietary regimens, emphasizing light foods during acute illness and strengthening foods during recovery, with beliefs shaped by humoral ideas and practical observation. Alcoholic beverages like beer, cider, wine, and rum are widely used as tonics or restoratives, partly because they are common, partly because they are believed to warm and fortify. You also notice how closely food ties into class and geography. If your household has resources, recovery includes meat, eggs, dairy, sugar, spices, maybe even citrus if trade connections allow. If your household is poor, recovery is mostly grain, broth if you can spare it, and whatever vegetables are stored. People talk about strength, but strength requires calories, and calories are not evenly distributed. Your caretaker brings you a small cup of cider or weak beer, watered down, and calls it restorative. The drink is tangy, slightly sweet, and it warms you as it goes down. You can feel your cheeks flush, and for a moment you almost feel human again. Joke 1 drifts in. Welcome to the 1700s, where your doctor's note is basically prescribe 1 beer, taken orally. Repeat as needed. In the humoral framework, food has qualities. Some foods are hot, some cold, some moist, some dry. Illness is imbalance, so food is used to push the body back toward equilibrium. If you are feverish, You might be told to avoid overly hot foods like heavy meat or strong spices. If you are weak and chilled, you might be urged toward warming foods and drinks. The advice can sound contradictory, and it often is, because different practitioners and households interpret it differently. Historians still argue how much these dietary beliefs were rooted in observed digestion and comfort versus inherited classical theory that persisted out of tradition. But you can see how the two blend. People notice that heavy food can upset a sick stomach. They notice that warm broth soothes. Then they wrap those observations in a theory that feels authoritative. As you recover, your caretaker starts talking about building you back up. She offers porridge with a bit of butter. She offers soft eggs if you have them. She offers a little meat, finely chopped, and watches you like a hawk to see if you tolerate it. Recovery becomes a slow negotiation between appetite and fear. You realize that food is also used as a social signal. If you can eat, you are improving. If you cannot, you are still in danger. So people watch you eat the way they watched your fever and your rash. Your chewing becomes a public metric. It is hard to savor a bite when it feels like a test. Joke 2 arrives. You have never felt so judged by a spoon. Then there are the restoratives, a category that sits somewhere between food and medicine and, honestly, coping mechanism. Things like syllabubs, possets, or spiced drinks, milk warmed with ale, broths enriched with fat, sweetened cordials. They are meant to strengthen you, but they also make recovery feel like a ritual. They give caregivers something to do. They give you something to swallow that tastes like effort. Sugar, when available, is both luxury and medicine. It makes bitter remedies tolerable. It adds calories. It also, ironically, contributes to dental problems over time. But nobody is in the mood to hear that from the guy missing a tooth because his sentry is allergic to anesthesia. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits perfectly. Some households keep electuaries, thick pastes made from honey or sugar mixed with herbs and spices, used as cough remedies or general tonics. They are basically early medicinal candy. And if you are sick, you might be fed spoonfuls with solemn faces as if you are receiving sacred syrup. Joke 3, you are being bribed into recovery with medieval dessert, and you would like to say, thank you, and also please stop calling it medicine. Alcohol, meanwhile, is everywhere, not just in restoratives, but as part of daily diet. Beer and cider can be safer than water in some contexts. Rum and brandy are used for warmth, for pain, for nerves, for celebration, for grief, for everything. During illness, small doses are often encouraged. Too much is blamed for weakness. The line between tonic and vice is thin, and society polices it unevenly. A wealthy man's brandy is medicine. A poor man's rum is a problem. Convenient. Historians still argue how prevalent heavy drinking truly was across different colonial regions and classes. But there is no doubt that alcohol plays a central role in daily life and health beliefs. In your household, you can see the practical side. A little spirits in a cold house feels like turning on an inner fire. As the days pass, you start craving fresh things, not just broth and bread. Something green, something crisp, but winter limits options. Stored apples, maybe, dried herbs, pickled vegetables. If you are lucky, you have root vegetables. If you are very lucky, you have access to something like citrus through trade, and someone brings it in as if it is a treasure. Vitamin C is not a concept yet, but people know that fresh fruit can feel like revival. Your caretaker tells you not to overeat, even when you want to, because a sudden heavy meal can overwhelm your digestion. She says your stomach is weak, like a muscle that needs training. She's not wrong. Recovery in this era is often slow because bodies are often undernourished to begin with, and because severe illnesses like smallpox drain you deeply. You begin to see how food and medicine are braided together. The kitchen is your pharmacy. The cook is your nurse. The pantry is your apothecary. The household's ability to feed you is part of your survival odds. And then you hear talk of someone else sick in town, someone poorer, whose family cannot spare meat or sugar, whose recovery is slower, whose weakness lingers. The difference is not moral, it is material. Historians still argue about the precise contribution of nutrition to recovery rates in early America, because records rarely track diets carefully. But it is hard to deny that bodies with more resources have more room to endure. Your bowl of broth is not just comfort, it is privilege in liquid form. You sit by the fire, finishing another meal, feeling your strength return in tiny increments. Your skin is still marked, but you are not fevered. Your mind is clearer. Your limbs are less shaky. You feel the weight of the past week starting to lift, even if the memory will stick. And you learn the 19th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Food is treatment. It is theory and comfort and survival strategy, shaped by humoral beliefs and hard reality. And in a world without modern drugs, the slow work of recovery often depends on something as simple and as unequal as whether your household can afford to put strength in your bowl. Once you are upright long enough to notice the world again, you also notice the quieter sickness that hits after the fever. Not in your body, in your household ledger, in the way your caretaker pauses at the pantry shelf, counting what is left, in the way your family talks about what we owe with a careful tone. Like debt is another contagion they are trying not to spread, because getting sick in 1700s America does not just cost sweat and pain. It costs money, goods, favors, and time. And time in a household economy is practically currency. You have been lying in bed for weeks. That means fields untended, tools unused, labor delayed, even if neighbors helped, even if family picked up the slack. The household output dipped. Maybe the harvest is smaller. Maybe a fence repair waited too long and livestock wandered. Maybe your apprentice fell behind. Illness ripples outward into every practical corner of life. A mainstream historical fact is that medical care in colonial America is often paid for through a mix of cash, credit, and barter, with physicians and surgeons charging fees that vary by region and status, and with households relying heavily on informal care to avoid expenses when possible. When the doctor first arrived, nobody asked about payment out loud, because that would be crude. But everyone thought about it. Doctors are not charity by default. They have horses to feed, supplies to buy, and reputations to maintain. Some offer leniency, some do not. And your ability to pay influences how often he returns and how attentive he is, even if he would swear otherwise. Now the bill exists, even if it is not a printed invoice. It might be a note in his casebook. It might be a verbal tally. 2 visits, bleeding, physic, inoculation service. Each item has a value in his mind. Your household has a value in theirs. And those values have to meet somewhere. You hear your caretaker say, "We can pay him after the spring," which is code for, "We do not have it now." Someone else suggests barter, eggs, a pig, a sack of grain, a day of labor, firewood, cloth. Colonial economies are flexible because cash can be scarce, especially away from cities. Payment is often whatever you have that someone else wants. Joke 1 slips in. Your medical bill is about to be paid in poultry, which feels like a very honest exchange for being bled. Then there is the medicine show bottle, which was not free either, and now sits on the shelf like a tiny reminder that even hope has a price tag. There were extra candles burned during your sick nights, extra firewood consumed to keep you warm, extra soap if you have it, or extra lie and labor if you do not. Extra food made into broth instead of being stretched across more days. Your sickness ate resources in small bites every day. If you are in a town, you might also owe the apothecary for ingredients. If you are rural, you owe neighbors for deliveries, for sitting watch, for lending linens, for bringing broth. Those debts are social as much as material. A community that helps expects reciprocity, even if it is unspoken. You will repay in labor, in goods, in attendance when their household gets sick. Because it will. Historians still argue how much mutual aid networks in colonial communities functioned as informal social insurance versus as systems of obligation that could trap poorer families in cycles of debt and dependence. From your perspective, it is both. Help feels like love. And it also feels like a list. One afternoon, the doctor returns briefly and your caretaker brings out a small pouch of coins, thin and carefully counted. She offers them with polite humility. The doctor accepts, nods, and says the rest can wait. Or he presses for more. Either outcome is possible. Your experience depends on the man and on your standing. If he is gracious, you feel relief. If he is stern, you feel shame. That is the emotional sting of medical debt. It comes with judgment. You are sick, which was not entirely your choice, and now you are expected to be financially neat about it, as if illness schedules itself around your savings. Joke 2 arrives. Tired. You would like to file for bankruptcy under smallpox, but the colonies are not really doing that yet. Your household considers selling something, maybe extra cloth, maybe a tool, maybe a portion of land. If things are dire, illness can push families into hard choices. In the 1700s, losing a productive adult for weeks can be catastrophic because the household economy is fragile. There is no employer sick leave. There is no disability insurance. There is no government safety net in the modern sense. There is only community, church charity sometimes, and your own store of resources. And charity has its own strings. Church relief might come with moral oversight. Neighbors may help, but also talk. Taking help can feel like admitting weakness. Some families avoid seeking a doctor precisely because they fear the cost, choosing instead to rely on home remedies until it is too late. Historians still argue about how often cost prevented colonists from seeking professional medical care and how much reliance on domestic medicine was driven by tradition versus financial necessity. But again, you can feel the reality in your bones. Medicine is expensive, and you just spent weeks being proof of it. There is also the cost of your reputation. If you had smallpox, some people avoided your house. That could affect trade. If you are a craftsman, customers might hesitate. If you are a merchant, partners might pause. If you are a laborer, employers might choose someone healthier. Even after recovery, illness can shadow your livelihood. Your scars become part of your business card. Your caretaker starts making plans for repayment the way she plans meals. She lists what can be spared. She calculates what can be traded. She decides which favors to call in. She keeps the household functioning while also carrying the burden of being the finance minister of survival. Here is a quirky tidbit that feels oddly modern. Some doctors keep detailed account books, recording not only payments but debts, partial payments, and barter arrangements. A line might read like a grocery list crossed with a medical chart. Visit bleeding physic, paid with bushels of corn. Your illness becomes an entry between someone's name and a number. Joke 3. Nothing makes you feel alive like realizing you are an itemized line in someone's notebook. As you return slowly to work, you also return to earning. You take on small tasks first, mending, light chopping, sitting and sorting, anything that contributes without exhausting you. Your family watches you closely, not just out of care, but out of economic necessity. Your recovery is tied to the household's recovery. If you relapse, the financial wound reopens. You step outside, breathe cold air, and look at the world with a new awareness. Every healthy person you pass is also a financial plan. Every family is one fever away from disruption. Every town is one outbreak away from trade collapsing. Illness is not a private misfortune. It is an economic shock, and you learn the 20th lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Survival comes with a bill, paid in coins when you have them, paid in chickens when you do not, paid in favors and labor either way. Because without modern safety nets, sickness turns households into accountants of endurance, measuring recovery not only in breath and strength, but in what it costs to keep a body alive long enough to work again. You go back to life the way you return to a house after a storm, slowly, checking what still stands, pretending you are fine while you notice every new crack. The first full day of work leaves your muscles shaking like they are offended you asked anything of them. Your skin feels tight when you sweat. Your face catches in the mirror of a wash basin and looks like someone else's. A version of you with a history written in tiny pits and pale marks. And your mouth reminds you, with every chew, that you are missing something you will never get back. Recovery in 1700s. America is not a clean finish line. It is a long, uneven road with potholes. You are technically alive, yes, but your body has changed its terms. A mainstream historical fact is that many people in the 18th century live with chronic pain, disability, and lingering effects from illness and injury. Because medical treatments are limited, and diseases like smallpox can leave lasting scars, vision problems, and weakness. Full recovery is often an ideal rather than a reality. You discover this in small, humiliating ways. You try to lift a bucket and your grip falters because your hand cramps. You climb a few steps and your breath goes shallow. You wake at night itching in places where the skin is smooth but your nerves still remember the sores. Your joints ache when the weather shifts. You are not sure if that is because you are getting older or because your body is still negotiating the aftermath of being invaded. Your household responds with a mix of relief and impatience. They are grateful you survived. They also need you functional. They tell you to take it easy, but they also hand you tasks. They do not know what post-viral fatigue is, but they recognize he's not himself. In this century, being not yourself is both a medical observation and a social problem. You hear stories of others who survived smallpox and never fully returned. A woman whose eyesight worsened afterward, her eyes scarred or inflamed. A man whose skin infections lingered. A child who lived but became frail. People say he never got his strength back, like strength is a thing you can misplace and never find again. Historians still argue how much chronic disability in early America is underreported in records because people normalized it, built lives around it, and did not always document it unless it affected property, military service, or public order. But the evidence is in daily life. Canes, limps, missing fingers, scarred faces, hollow coughs, women weakened by repeated childbirth. You see it everywhere once you start looking. You also learn the social consequences of visible sickness. Your scars draw glances. Some people look away quickly, embarrassed for you. Some stare too long, curious. A few treat you with an odd respect, like you survived a duel, but the attention is tiring. You become aware of how much your face is part of your identity, and how much your identity is now rewritten by a virus you did not choose. Joke one slips in. You are basically wearing a permanent "I have been through it" filter, and it is not optional. The missing tooth is its own little drama. You catch yourself covering your mouth when you laugh. Certain foods feel different. Speech sounds slightly altered. In a world where dentistry is mostly extraction, missing teeth are common, but that does not make it pleasant. Your mouth feels like a room with furniture removed, and your tongue keeps checking the empty space like it is trying to solve a mystery. Your family tries to help you reclaim normalcy. They encourage you to eat more. They suggest tonics. They urge fresh air. They also urge you to stop dwelling, because dwelling is seen as weakness. The culture values endurance. You are expected to carry scars quietly and keep going, and then there are the losses that do not show on you at all. Someone in town did not survive the outbreak. You attend a funeral, standing in cold air, feeling your strength wobble. The coffin looks too small, or too heavy, or both. You listen to prayers that try to explain death as part of a plan, and you feel a complicated gratitude that you are not inside the wood, mixed with guilt that someone else is. Historians still argue whether communities in the 18th century had different emotional relationships to death because it was more common, or whether people grieved just as deeply but expressed it through different rituals and language. Watching your neighbors' faces. You know one thing, grief does not get easier. It just gets more practiced. Joke 2 arrives, gentle and sad. The 1700s are really out here giving everyone emotional calluses. You notice how relapse is always feared. A cough returns and everyone stiffens. A feverish flush appears and someone says, "Not again." Even minor symptoms carry heavy meaning now. Your household has learned that illness can come back, or that a new illness can arrive before you have recovered from the last. The body does not get a peaceful recovery window just because you ask nicely. This is also where chronic conditions creep into the story. Rheumatism, a catch-all term for joint pain. Consumption, the wasting illness that later generations associate with tuberculosis. Lingering and romanticized in some circles, but terrifying in reality. Dropsy, swelling from heart or kidney failure. People live with these conditions for months or years, adjusting their lives around them, treating symptoms with herbs, tonics, bleeding sometimes, and prayer, always prayer. Here is a quirky tidbit that feels oddly modern. Some people keep little personal journals or family records that note illnesses and recoveries, not just as stories, but as warnings and patterns. He had the fever in 54. She took the pox and lived. These notes become household memory, a crude health record passed down as cautionary folklore. Joke 3. Your medical chart is basically your family's gossip, written in ink. You find yourself moving differently now, more cautious around blades, more careful in winter, more aware of who is coughing. You have become a person with a before and after, and the after includes a permanent awareness of how thin the line is. Yet life continues. You attend market again. You shake hands again, though you hesitate for a beat, because your brain still remembers contagion. You step into the church again and feel the weight of eyes. Not unkind, just curious. You return to work and feel the satisfaction of usefulness, mixed with the fear of overdoing it. And you begin to understand the 21st lesson of getting sick in 1700s America. Survival is not a reset, it is a new arrangement. You carry scars, weakness, and memory into your daily labor, and the community carries its own losses and fears. So recovery is not a straight climb toward health, but a careful negotiation with a body that has learned how easily it can be broken and how stubbornly it can keep going anyway. You wake one morning and realize, with a quiet surprise, that you slept through the night without anyone checking your forehead, no vinegar cloth, no whispered count of your breaths, no anxious shuffle of feet in the dark. The house feels normal in that simple, almost sacred way you never notice until it disappears and returns. The hearth crackles for cooking, not for emergency warmth. The table holds bread and tools, not basins and bandages. Your world, which shrank to the size of a bed for so long, is stretching again. And yet you cannot go back to being the person you were before, because neither you nor your community is the same after surviving sickness in 1700s America. Something has shifted, and if you listen closely, you can hear change stirring like wind before a storm. Not loud yet, but coming. Medicine is beginning to change too, not fast, not cleanly, not in a way that would make you feel safe if you had another fever tomorrow, but there are hints everywhere, like small sparks. A mainstream historical fact is that across the 18th century, medical practice in America becomes more organized and professionalized in some regions, with growing numbers of formally trained physicians, expanding print medical literature, and early development of hospitals and dispensaries, especially in larger towns. Even though home care remains dominant, you hear about a new kind of place in the city, where the sick poor can sometimes receive treatment, a charitable institution that looks like mercy and also like social control. You hear of hospitals not as sleek centers of cure, but as institutions for those who cannot be cared for at home. Often the impoverished, the friendless, the seamen, the people whose sickness becomes a public problem. For many middle and upper households, home remains the preferred sick room because hospitals have reputations for being crowded, dirty, and full of death. But the fact that hospitals exist at all is a sign that the old, purely domestic model is being supplemented by institutions. Historians still argue whether early American hospitals and dispensaries should be understood primarily as humanitarian advances or as tools of urban management, keeping the sick and poor contained and supervised. The truth is probably both, because humans rarely build institutions for only one reason. You also notice change in the way people talk about prevention. Inoculation is still controversial, still risky, still a spark that starts arguments at dinner tables, but it is spreading. More households accept it. Some towns regulate it. Some doctors specialize in it. The idea that you can prevent a disease rather than simply endure it is revolutionary in a society used to reacting after the fact. And the print world keeps churning. Newspapers, pamphlets, almanacs. Health advice spreads faster than before. Some of it is good, some of it is nonsense. But the idea that medical knowledge can circulate widely, that you can read about symptoms and treatments without personally knowing a doctor, changes the relationship between ordinary people and medicine. Your caretaker might not call it empowerment, but she feels it when she copies a recipe from a printed sheet and keeps it in the household book. Joke 1 slips in. Soft congratulations. You have graduated from ask the neighbor to read a pamphlet, which is basically the 1700s version of Googling symptoms. And yes, it is still dangerous. You hear whispers of new ideas too. Not germs, not yet in a way that shapes daily life, but experiments, observations, the slow accumulation of questions. Some practitioners begin to emphasize careful observation and case reporting more systematically. They argue over what works. They keep records. They compare outcomes. It is not modern clinical trials, but it is a shift toward evidence, even if it is messy evidence. At the same time, old practices persist. Bloodletting is still here. Purges are still here. Blisters are still here. The traveling medicine show is still here, rattling bottles and selling hope. Faith interpretations are still here, framing illness as a message and trial. Change does not replace the old overnight, It layers on top of it. Historians still argue whether the 18th century should be seen as a period of meaningful medical progress or as a long plateau before the dramatic transformations of the 19th century, when anesthesia, antisepsis, and germ theory finally change the game. But from where you stand, with scars on your face and weakness in your legs, progress is not an abstract timeline. It is whether the next person sick in your town has a better chance than you did. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes you smile in spite of yourself. Some communities begin to treat recovered smallpox survivors as valuable because they can safely care for the sick during outbreaks without the same fear of catching it again. Your scars, which drew stares, also become a kind of credential. People might ask you to sit with someone else's child, to bring water, to help. You become, in a strange way, part of the community's disease response plan. Joke 2. You have accidentally gained a new job title. Person who already suffered. Your own outlook shifts. You wash your hands more than you used to. Not because you understand microbes, but because you understand memory. You avoid crowded spaces during rumors of fever. You pay attention to wells and waste. You listen when someone describes symptoms. You become the annoying person who says, "Be careful," and you do not even feel embarrassed about it. Illness has made you practical. You also notice how communities start to coordinate in small ways. During outbreaks, they post notices. They restrict gatherings sometimes. They set up informal care plans. They argue fiercely, but they argue as a group, which means the idea of collective health is forming, however imperfectly. Ports strengthen quarantine measures because trade demands it. Town councils debate cleanliness because citizens demand it. People begin to treat health as something that can be managed socially, not just endured privately. Joke 3. Gentle. The early version of public health is mostly neighbors yelling at each other. But it is a start. And now, as your story edges toward its quiet closing, you feel the weight of everything you have moved through. The doctor's knock, the house becoming a hospital. The bleeding, the purging, the bitter tease, the terror of smallpox, the gamble of inoculation, the unseen networks of water and waste, the winter coughs, the dangers carried by ships and the dangers born in swamps, the borrowed knowledge from indigenous healers, the brutal inequalities of slavery, the hush around mental distress, the harsh reality of surgery, the medicine show bottle, the prayers that comforted and judged, the slow, nourishing return of food, the debts, the scars. You are standing now, not perfectly, but steadily enough to feel the floor under your feet and believe it will hold. You step outside in the late afternoon, when the light softens and the air is cool and clean. The sky is wide. Somewhere a dog barks and then settles. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin threads. People move through the road with bundles and buckets and that steady, stubborn rhythm of life continuing. And you realize the deepest truth of it all. Getting sick in 1700s America is never just about medicine. It is about community, labor, fear, faith, and the slow evolution of ideas. You survive not because the system is strong, but because people are. Because care is improvised and repeated. Because knowledge travels in whispers. Because families and neighbors do what they can, even when what they can is imperfect. Now the pace slows, the same way your breathing slows when you finally feel safe enough to stop listening for disaster. You let your shoulders drop. You let the night air cool your skin. The scars on your face do not feel like wounds anymore, just texture. Proof you lived through a season that could have ended you. Your body is tired. But it is a familiar tired now. The kind that belongs to ordinary days. You turn back toward the house. The window glows warm. Someone inside laughs softly. The sound is small, but it fills you with calm. You step in, close the door, and the world narrows to wood, firelight, and the steady promise of another night that you might actually sleep through. End of script. Sweet dreams.